Chapter 362. The scribe said, Chief Escort Lu, we will have to trouble you. However, this is only a temporary measure and will be rescinded in a few days. We will be responsible for all the losses of your escort agency. Chief Escort Lu cupped his hands and said, Commander Zhou is too polite. Elder Shi of your esteemed sect is my savior. If I don't help out with such a small matter, wouldn't I be worse than a pig or a dog? Don't mention this compensation again. However, Commander Zhou disagreed and said, Chief Escort Lu, you're wrong. Your friendship with Elder Shi is one thing, but we're already very happy that you're willing to help us with this big favor for Elder Shi's sake. This will delay the escort agency's business, but it's a matter of official business. We can't let private matters affect official business. Moreover, this is also my sect leader's intention, so please don't decline. Otherwise, when I return to the sect, how will I explain this to Elder Shi? I can't let Elder Shi laugh at me for taking advantage of others because of him. Ha ha ha! Chief Escort Lu laughed loudly and said, If that's the case, then I won't stand on ceremony. Thank you for your sect master's kindness. Commander Zhou also laughed and said, Likewise, I still have to thank Chief Escort Lu for your kindness. The two drank tea for a while, then Chief Escort Lu asked, Commander Zhou, it's already the 4th day, and we still haven't seen the person or thing you mentioned. I presume they're no longer in Tanha City. Perhaps. Some of the sect's brothers have already followed the path down, but there hasn't been any news back yet. Hall Master Chiu also returned to the sect yesterday to report the completion of the mission. Looking at the situation along the way, there's an 80 to 90% chance that they've already been picked up by their experts. Chief Escort Lu asked with interest, Commander Zhou, what are you looking for, and who are you looking for? Can you tell me a little? Commander Zhou laughed and said, This isn't Chief Escort Lu's style. You haven't asked me about it for 3 days, so why are you asking again today? Aren't you making things difficult for me? Chief Escort Lu chuckled and said, Aren't people always curious? Ah, curiosity killed the cat. Chief Escort Lu, it's better if you don't know what you shouldn't know. It's not that I don't want to tell you, but it'll really kill you if I tell you. Ah. Chief Escort Lu was dumbfounded. He quickly said, Then it's better if Commander Zhou doesn't say anything. Then he changed the topic and talked about something else. Zhang Xiaohua was bored and was about to leave when she heard Chief Escort Lu ask again, How is Elder Shi doing in your sect? I haven't seen him for many years. How did he join your esteemed sect? That's right. Your sect doesn't seem to have a great reputation. I've been in Jianghu for most of my life, so why haven't I heard of it? Hee hee. Chief Escort Lu laughed and said, That's right, I really haven't heard of it. However, since Elder Shi was able to join your sect, you must be from a prestigious sect, right? A prestigious sect? Commander Zhou sneered and said, How can a prestigious sect be compared to us? I'm not afraid to tell you that if it weren't for Elder Shi's personal relationship with the sect leader, with Elder Shi's skills, he might not have been able to occupy the position of the last elder in our sect. Ah, Chief Escort Lu was shocked. He had always thought that his savior was an important figure in this sect, so he had been neglectful in front of the scholar a few days ago. Now that he knew that the person he thought was his backer might not even be in his eyes, the expression on his face immediately became more respectful. Then your esteemed sect. Chief Escort Lu seemed to want to ask something more. Zhang Xiaohua also pricked up her ears outside, wanting to know what kind of powerful sect this was. At this moment, the sound of hurried footsteps could be heard from outside. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly curled up her body and heard a person running in hurriedly. He first cupped his hands in salute to Chief Escort Lu, then moved closer to Commander Zhou's ear and whispered a few words. Commander Zhou's expression changed drastically. He stood up from his chair with a bang and shouted in disbelief, What did you say? Hall Master Chiu and his party of 5 were killed at the outskirts of the East Gate? This Commander Zhou's ability to remain calm was actually worse than the person who reported the news. Chief Escort Liu, who was watching from the side, couldn't help but feel a little disdainful. How could such an uncultured scholar be a commander? However, Chief Escort Liu underestimated him too much. Chief Escort Liu and the person who reported the news didn't know the extent of Hall Master Chiu's martial arts. Even if they knew that his martial arts were superb, they wouldn't know to what extent. Commander Zhou, on the other hand, knew Hall Master Chiu's background like the back of his hand. He deeply knew that Hall Master Chiu was a capable subordinate that his sect master had secretly nurtured. Although his martial arts were superb, he had never made a name for himself in the Jianghu. If he were in the Jianghu, he would definitely be the kind that could cause huge waves. His reputation might not be any worse than the current Righteous Alliance's deputy alliance masters who are currently flourishing. And yet, such a formidable figure had actually been beaten to a pulp at the outskirts of Tana City's East Gate. He couldn't be more dead. 5 people had actually died in the same way. Not a single one of them had escaped. Even the 5 horses had been kicked to death. This was simply something that he had never dreamt of. Where did Rejuvenation Valley find such a formidable helper? After hearing such shocking news, how could he still sit there calmly? Naturally, his previous self-restraint had long been tossed beyond the highest heavens. Commander Zhou couldn't be bothered to look at the 2 people's astonished gazes. He then slapped his head and said, I've fallen for the enemy's diversionary tactic. Chief Escort Liu, this one needs to personally make a trip. Farewell, farewell. Then he turned to the messenger and said, You hurry and inform the brothers in the city to assemble fully armed at the East Gate. Release a carrier pigeon and inform the brothers who went south to send a portion of them over. Tell them that Rejuvenation Valley's men are hiding in Tanha City and have now turned back. Ask them to hurry and provide support. Oh, right. Also inform Sect Master to send an elder-level expert over. We'll attack them from the front and back. Let's see where they can escape. When he finished speaking, he hurriedly left with the messenger. Chief Escort Liu followed him out of the elegant room, muttering as he walked. How did we get into a conflict with Rejuvenation Valley? Really, I was wondering why we didn't send the bodyguard to Macho City. I forgot to ask him if that notice has been withdrawn. Then he shook his head and said, It's better not to withdraw it yet. When immortals fight, don't involve mortals. Someone will compensate me for my losses anyway. What's the hurry? Zhang Xiaohua was lying on the roof of the elegant room. When she heard these words, she was so angry that she almost released a flying sword from the roof to hack this guy to death. Nonsense, you're not in a hurry, but I am. When Chief Escort Liu left, Zhang Xiaohua also floated down from the roof and disappeared with a twist of her body. She only emerged from the ground after she had used Earth escape to a secluded place. She was filled with regret. What was all this? The escort agency didn't have any bodyguards. How was she going to get rid of this burden? But now wasn't the time to get rid of this burden. Commander Zhou had fallen for her diversion tactic and had mobilized all the men in the city to the main road at the East Gate. When she thought of this, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but shake her head and wag her tail. Her quick-witted idea at that time had actually been seen as a well-thought-out stratagem. How could she not feel proud? Right now, the most important thing for Nia Qianyu and Little Orange was to leave Tanha City first. Of course, they didn't have to consider the east and south gates. They could only leave through the west and north gates first. Moreover, they'd heard from Commander Zhou just now that the brothers in the city probably included the men guarding the 3 city gates. If they didn't leave now, when Commander Zhou reacted and sent people to guard the gates, they would certainly be able to kill them. However, wouldn't that be beating the grass and alerting the snake? How could she do this kind of work that didn't require any skill? After thinking about it, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly inquired about the address of the carriage company and found a shop nearby. Without bargaining, she found a medium-sized carriage and a good horse and bought them together. Fortunately, Nietchinu had just given her a small purse. Otherwise, our hero Zhang would have to pay for it himself. Zhang Xiaohua drove the carriage back to the small courtyard of the inn. Nietchinu and Little Orange looked at each other with bitter faces. When they saw Zhang Xiaohua driving the carriage back, their faces immediately changed. Zhang Xiaohua didn't explain and said, "Hurry up and pack your things. Move everything in the small carriage to the new carriage. I'll give you the time to drink a cup of tea." After saying that, she didn't look at the two's faces and hurriedly went to the inn to find the shopkeeper to settle the bill. When she came back after settling the bill, Little Orange had already packed everything and was standing in front of the carriage waiting for her. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised and asked, "Where's Miss Nia?" Little Orange looked at the carriage and said, "There, she's in the carriage." Zhang Xiaohua laughed and said, "Hee hee, she ran quite fast. What about you? Why don't you get in the carriage?" Looking at the martial arts master in front of her, who she used to think was a country bumpkin, Little Orange was speechless and only said, You really don't intend to send us off?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned and said, "Yes, I really don't intend to send you off. Hurry up and get in the carriage." Little Orange bit her lips and bowed to him. She said, "Then I'll thank you on behalf of Miss Nia for saving our lives. The world is big and the world is full of vicissitudes. I don't know when we'll meet again. Brother Rin, I hope you—" Hearing Little Orange's words, Zhang Xiaohua almost laughed out loud. He only kept a straight face and interrupted her and said, "Okay, I know. Hurry up and get in the carriage." Little Orange's unfinished words were choked back by Zhang Xiaohua. She had no choice but to get into the carriage, put down the curtain, and stop talking. Zhang Xiaohua led Huan Huan over from the side and patted its head, indicating for it to follow the carriage. She jumped into the carriage and drove towards the west gate without saying anything. She didn't say anything along the way. When they got close to the west gate, Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly released her divine sense. As expected, she didn't see any Jianghu people holding swords outside the city. Only then did she feel relieved and leisurely drove the carriage out of the city. But what about after leaving the city? Zhang Xiaohua muttered in her heart. If she didn't find any bodyguards who would send these two to Carefree City. -3. Chapter 363. The carriage gradually moved forward. A black horse was pulling the carriage, and the bell on its neck jingled. The sound was exceptionally crisp on the road. Nietchinu and Little Orange, who were in the carriage, were in a bad mood. They didn't say anything and were too lazy to pay attention to everything outside the carriage. They knew that after a while, the young man who was holding a long sword and leaping into the air would ride his David's deer and part ways with them. In this vast sea of people, they didn't know when they would meet again. They even faintly felt that this mysterious young man might not say goodbye to them when he left. Yes, goodbye, goodbye. It was a simple sentence, but it was filled with deep expectations. Sure enough, after the time of 2 meals, the curtain of the carriage hadn't been pulled open. The interior of the carriage was dusky. From time to time, light would penetrate through the gaps of the carriage, sweeping across the two's tightly stiff little faces. He really did leave. He left without saying goodbye. The two of them thought at the same time. However, when the crisp sound of the bell rang, it was like a deafening bell. Both of their delicate bodies trembled violently. Their gazes collided in the dusky carriage, and both of them were filled with surprise and disbelief. Almost at the same time they whispered, "Why didn't I hear him talking to the bodyguard? Why are we outside the city?" Right now, it was quiet outside the carriage. Even the occasional sound was soft. Where was the impetuosity unique to Tanha City? If that bell was in the city, how could it have such a heavenly sound? The two of them seemed to have woken up from a dream and rushed to pull open the curtain in front. It wasn't the shoulder that wasn't very broad, the back view that had been deeply engraved in their hearts right in front of them? Little Orange rushed to say, "Ren Xiaoyao, why didn't you leave?" Nietchinu also asked, "Big Brother Rin, why didn't you send us to the escort agency?" Why did you send us out of the city? Where is this place? Zhang Xiaohua turned her head to look at the two girls, who were overjoyed. Her heart also felt warm. It felt good to be protected by someone, not to mention a man who could protect a girl. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua truly felt like an adult. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "This is the west gate of Tanha City. We are already some distance away from Tanha City. What are you two doing? Are you afraid of running into bad guys? Are you hiding inside and not daring to come out?" The two of them nodded tacitly and said, "That's right. If we're discovered in the city, we won't be able to escape. There's no need for that now. They've all gone to the east gate and are chasing after you on the way we came. No one should be able to discover you for the time being." "Oh." Little Orange didn't quite understand. "Oh." Nya Chinyu instantly smiled and said, "So it was planned by Big Brother Rin. I really admire you." Zhang Xiaohua shook her head. "Miss Nya thinks too highly of me. I just casually killed a few bad guys. How could I think so far ahead? Haha, Big Brother Rin is too modest." Nya Chenyu was not stingy with her words. Little Orange was puzzled and said, Young Master Rin, I still don't understand. Why didn't you send us to the escort agency?" Hearing Little Orange calling herself young master and calling herself a maid, Zhang Xiaohua frowned slightly and explained, "Little Orange, do you think I didn't want to send you to the escort agency? But even if I wanted to, they wouldn't dare to accept this mission." Little Orange was curious and asked, "Why is that, young master in?" Nya Chinyu smiled and said, "I see." This smile was very sweet. "Miss Nya, you're really smart and very impressive." Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but praise her. Nya Chinyu waved her hands and said, "It's useless to be smart. In front of Big Brother Ren's powerful martial arts, any little trick is just a small trick." At this moment, Little Orange also understood. Looking at her Mrs. excited face, her expression changed slightly. Then she immediately returned to normal and said, "Miss is really amazing. I really admire you." Zhang Xiaohua told her about how she went to the escort agency to find bodyguards. Then she shrugged and said, "I didn't have a choice. I couldn't just watch you fall into the hands of the bad guys. Moreover, if those people returned and couldn't find you, they might return to Tanha City. I had no choice but to bring you out first. Sigh, it seems like we have to wait until we reach the next town." Hearing this, Nya Chinyu and Little Orange's expressions turned ugly. They looked at each other and Nya Chinyu asked, "Big Brother Rin, can you tell me where you're going now?" Zhang Xiaohua thought for a while and said, "Miss Nya, can you tell me where Macho City is? Or do you know how to get to Macho City?" Zhang Xiaohua didn't know where Macho City was, let alone how to get there. When he was at the escort agency, although he wanted to ask, he was afraid of attracting attention. However, this Miss Nya in front of him was only 12 years old. In his imagination, she might not know how to get there. Who would have thought that Nya Chinyu would only ponder for a moment before she explained the route from Tanha City to Carefree City, clearly without any hesitation? Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. The thought of, "Why is there such a big difference between people?" flashed into his mind again. He thought about how he had only just found out how to get to Pingyang City. Look at this 12-year-old girl. TSK. She was so much better than him. However, immediately a little person appeared in his mind and advised earnestly, "Don't compare yourself with others, silly boy. You're the son of a farmer. Being simple is your true nature." Pooh! Zhang Xiaohua spat on the ground. He had Nya Chinyu's charm. He thought to himself, "Do nobles and generals have guts?" Seeing Zhang Xiaohua's behavior, the two people in the carriage were surprised. They thought in unison, "Is this habit also contagious?" From Nya Chinyu's explanation, Zhang Xiaohua found out that Macho City was south of Tanha City. It was about a month's journey away. The Pingyang City that he requested was southwest of Tanha City. It was still very far from Macho City. The two routes were completely separated at Tanha City. Of course, all roads led to U City, but the most comfortable official road was like this. If Zhang Xiaohua wanted to return to Pingyang City, he would have to go through the west gate of Tanha City. There was an official road that passed by several cities before reaching Pingyang City. This was also the route that Ji Xiaohua had drawn for him. If he wanted bodyguards to escort Nie Qinyu, he would have to go through the south gate of Tanha City. There was also an official road that led to Macho City. That was also the direction that the unknown gang was pursuing Nie Qinyu. Of course, Zhang Xiaohua still had a choice. In the first 10 days, there would be a famous escort company in a big city. It was not a bad idea to let them escort Nie Qinyu. However, this would delay Nie Qinyu's journey and take a lot of detours. Thinking of the detours, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly had a new idea. He stroked his chin and thought carefully about the possibilities. Behind him, Nie Qinyu and Little Orange saw that Zhang Xiaohua did not say anything after asking for the location of Macho City. They sat quietly in the carriage and looked at the passing scenery outside. However, they did not pay attention to anything. They only secretly prayed, "Will he change his mind? Will he send us to Rejuvenation Valley?" After a while, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Miss Nie, I have an idea. Do you think it will work?" Nie Qinyu asked curiously, "Please speak, Brother Rin. Actually, I originally planned to hire bodyguards to escort you two back to Macho City in Tanha City. However, I did not expect that Fu Shan Escort Company would not accept the escort to the south. Therefore, I have no choice but to place my hopes on the next city. However, I cannot guarantee that there will be a suitable escort company in the next city. Moreover, I am not sure if the escort company will be like Fu Shan Escort Company and not dare to accept this escort. Moreover, to hand you two over to unfamiliar bodyguards, that I have decided that I can't bear it. Nonsense. You only realized it now. So you have been treating us like goods and letting people escort us. God has opened his eyes. You only realized it now." Nie Qinyu and Little Orange looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with joy and relief. Zhang Xiaohua continued to explain, "The place I am going to is definitely not where you two can follow me." However, seeing Zhang Xiaohua dawdling, Little Orange became impatient and said, "Can't you finish your sentence in one sentence?" Nie Qinyu hurriedly pulled Little Orange's sleeve with her uninjured left hand and said, "Little Orange, let Brother Rin finish." Zhang Xiaohua chuckled and said, "However, you two can follow me all the way there. After I am done with my business, I will send you back. How about that?" Ah! Nie Qinyu and Little Orange could not believe their ears. Nie Qinyu hurriedly asked, "Brother Rin, I have thought of this idea. However, the matter you are going to do must be extremely confidential and important. It will probably cause a sensation in the martial arts world. If we follow you, won't we affect you? That's why I don't dare to say it." Zhang Xiaohua scratched the few strands of mustache on his chin with his fingers and said with a smile, "It's fine. As long as you don't have to follow me when you reach a place. When I'm done, I'll meet you at that place and send you off." "Oh, yes, Miss Nie. Are you in a hurry to go back to Macho City?" Nie Qinyu smiled and said, "Even if we are in a hurry, we need to be alive to go back. The place Brother Rin is going to is definitely not in the same direction as Macho City. It might even be very far away. The further we go, the harder it will be for those bad guys to find us. Brother Rin, you are so smart. What a brilliant plan. You can achieve two goals with one stroke. I admire you." After hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua raised his invisible tail high. He was just short of a feather fan to show the elegance of a wise man. Sigh! Actually, as long as people get along with each other, it is inevitable that they will want to protect each other, let alone two budding girls. Since Zhang Xiaohua had the ability to send the two girls home after visiting the Guozhuang house, as a man, how could he refuse such a cushy task? Everything was caused by male chauvinism. -3. Chapter 364. Faint snowflakes drifted down like salt grains, covering the mountains and rivers, and even dyeing the boundless fields white. A thin layer of snow had already accumulated on the straight and wide road. The road was slippery in the snow, and there were very few people on the road. At this time there was a clear dingling sound, and a carriage came from afar. Pulling the carriage was an ordinary black horse, and there was nothing special about it. But what was strange was that the carriage didn't travel in the middle of the official road. In the middle of the road, parallel to the black horse pulling the carriage, there was a glossy and spirited mule. On the carriage, pulled by the black horse, sat a skinny young man. His eyes were closed as he rested. His hands were in an extremely mysterious position. It seemed that he had already fallen asleep. Everything seemed so normal. However, if one were to pay close attention, one would be able to clearly see that although the snowflakes that filled the sky and became bigger and bigger stained everything, they did not seem to disturb the young man's beautiful dream at all. This was because there seemed to be a transparent cover around the young man's body. When the snowflakes landed on his body, it was as if they had landed on an abnormally smooth surface. They could not stay there and would slide to the side. Therefore, the snowflakes that filled the sky could not leave a single mark on the young man's body. Right at this moment, a soft and clear voice sounded out. "Big Brotherin, the snow is getting heavier and heavier. Aren't you going to take shelter in the carriage?" Wasn't it Nye Chinyu's voice? The three people in the carriage were none other than Zhang Xiaohua, Nye Chinyu, and Little Orange, who had come out of Tanha City. Upon hearing the voice, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes, loosened his hands, and released his divine sense. Immediately, a faint smile appeared on his face. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua was different from before. Although he had not seen him for more than a month, his youthful face seemed to have matured a lot. His smile also had a mature charm. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, "Little fishy, it's okay. I like to see the scene of snow staining the earth. This snow can make me think of vitality and hibernation. Why don't you come out and have a look? Big Brotherin, I've said it hundreds of times. Don't call me Little Fishy. My name is Little You. Really." Nye Chinyu's reproachful words came from the carriage. Zhang Xiaohua raised his eyebrows and said, "You two, one is Little Orange, and the other is Little Fishy. Aren't you a good match? Luckily, I'm smart enough to think of such a good name. Little Fishy, aren't you going to give me more money for the name?" "Bah!" Nye Chinyu spat and said, "Shameless." Another voice sounded, "Miss, I think you'd better take out those few golden leaves, lest young Masterin keeps thinking about them." "What? The food and drink expenses along the way, the hotel expenses, and Huanhuan's expenses. Which one of them didn't use my money? How can he have the nerve to say that? Ha ha ha!" Zhang Xiaohua felt very refreshed when he heard this. Of course, he didn't spend a single cent of his own money and rushed over from Tanha City. How could he not be happy? Upon hearing Zhang Xiaohua's laughter, the people in the carriage also laughed. Nye Chinyu smiled and said, "Big Brotherin, the sky is going to be dark soon and the snow is getting heavier. I'm afraid we won't be able to make it to the town." Nye Chinyu felt very strange. They had been traveling for more than a month. Zhang Xiaohua was unusually cautious and never spent the night in the wilderness. Even when he saw that it was still early, he stayed in an inn and didn't move forward. Logically speaking, with his superb martial arts, why would he be afraid of some petty thieves? However, since Zhang Xiaohua didn't explain, she didn't feel right to ask. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "It's okay. Pingyang City is about 4 to 5 miles ahead. If we speed up, we should be able to make it by the time the sky turns dark. We've already passed the first day of the new year on the road, and we'll have to pass the 5th day of the new year in Pingyang City." Nye Chinyu said in surprise, "Big Brotherin, aren't you always bad at directions? How did you know that we're reaching Pingyang City today? It's all white outside the carriage. How can you tell?" Upon hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua only laughed and didn't explain. Nye Chinyu in the carriage also seemed to be used to it and didn't pursue the matter. Zhang Xiaohua shouted habitually, "Hiya!" The deer immediately swung its tail and hit the black horse's buttocks. The black horse's hooves tightened again, and it galloped forward quickly into the boundless snow. After Zhang Xiaohua left Tanha City, she told Nie Qinyu about her thoughts. Although Miss Nie was young, she was much more experienced than Zhang Xiaohua when she was the same age 5 years ago. She was also insightful about the ways of the world. How could she not quickly cozy up to Rinpoche? Naturally, she didn't have any objections. Wasn't it just a detour? Even if she had to go out to sea for a round, as long as she could return to Carefree City safely, she was willing to do so. Moreover, besides, there was another small thought. Hee, let's not expose other people's privacy. From Tanha City to Pingyang City, it was only a short curve in Xiaohua's scroll. Zhang Xiaohua drove the carriage for almost a month to pass through the few cities in between. Even the first day of the new year was spent hurriedly on the road. In the end, Zhang Xiaohua didn't return to Guozhuang House during the new year. In the beginning, Zhang Xiaohua used the whip on the carriage to drive the black horse. However, after a long time, she got tired of it. Huan, the deer, was indeed the spirit beast that Zhang Xiaohua mentioned. It actually understood its master's thoughts and caught up with Zhang Xiaohua. It only stopped when it reached a fork in the road and waited for Zhang Xiaohua's instructions. Along the way, Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed and thanked Xiaohua even more in her heart. When Nie Qinyu and Little Orange saw that the deer was so intelligent, they were also very surprised and liked it. Both of them had reared the deer before and had a deep understanding of its diet. Nie Qinyu's carriage didn't lack money. So along the way, although Huan was a little different from the Rejuvenation Valley's deer, it was also well-fed and shiny. It was no longer as ugly as it was in Songning Town. As for Nie Qinyu and Little Orange, after interacting with Zhang Xiaohua for more than a month, they went from being in awe and fear at the beginning to gradually getting to know him. They knew that this young man with powerful martial arts was not unapproachable and unapproachable. If his mysterious behavior and powerful martial arts were covered up, the Ren Xiaoyao in their eyes at the beginning was his true self. Speaking of mysterious behavior, Zhang Xiaohua had to sleep well every night. Even when sitting in the carriage, he had to close his eyes to rest. Sometimes he was obviously terrible with directions, but sometimes he could point out the road ahead. Sometimes he even had the feeling that he could foresee things ahead. This really puzzled Nie Qinyu. What annoyed Nie Qinyu the most was that this guy didn't even take out a single penny along the way. He always stretched out his hand to her to pay for everything. This wasn't the style of a martial arts hero. However, Nie Qinyu was also very gratified by the benefits brought about by this most annoying thing. From Tanha City to Pingyang City, they had encountered all kinds of bandits, robbers, and other evil deeds. However, at this time, the value of a martial arts man was fully displayed. This guy didn't care how many robbers there were in front of him. He just looked left and right and came over with his long sword. He randomly found an extremely thick tree or a huge rock. He took a deep breath and swung his sword down. No matter how thick the tree was or how hard the rock was, it would collapse at the touch of his sword. Then Zhang Xiaohua leisurely got into the carriage, while all the robbers were dumbfounded. He shouted, "Go!" and the black horse automatically drove away, leaving behind the admiring gazes of the robbers. Of course, there were also some who felt good about themselves because they had more people. Zhang Xiaohua didn't hold back. No matter how many people there were, she killed them all with one strike and then used the second strike. Nie Qinyu and Little Orange were starry-eyed when they thought of that. Then they spat and laughed. This guy is really barbaric. At the same time, they hid in the carriage and covered their mouths. How much money would it take to hire such a brave and fierce bodyguard? It was a tiring but joyful journey for more than a month. Unknowingly, they were close to Pingyang City. Nie Qinyu was so smart. Ever since they left Tanha City, she didn't mention where they were going. She only followed Zhang Xiaohua's wishes. Occasionally, when Zhang Xiaohua couldn't make up her mind, she would raise her own opinions. Her tone didn't show any intention of inquiring about Zhang Xiaohua's destination. However, Niet Qianyu was very familiar with the distribution of each city. Zhang Xiaohua's route was also very clear. As early as more than 10 days ago, she already knew that Pingyang City was on her route. She just didn't know that this Pingyang City was Zhang Xiaohua's destination. 5 days ago, on the first day of the new year, the three of them spent it in a very small town. Zhang Xiaohua didn't mind. She hadn't spent time with her mother and father for many years. Although she really wanted to, she gave up the idea when she saw that it was still far away from home. She only felt a faint longing in her heart. However, Niet Qianyu was different. It seemed that she hadn't spent the new year outside since she was young. That night, her eyes were red and she didn't eat much. Zhang Xiaohua didn't know how to persuade her. She only comforted her and accompanied her silently. Fortunately, Little Orange took his young mistress out for a walk. When they returned, although Niet Qianyu's eyes and face were red, she was in a good mood. It was just that she kept glancing at Zhang Xiaohua. She even toasted Zhang Xiaohua with a few cups of wine on a simple table. -3. Chapter 365. Recalling how Niet Qianyu's eyes were as red as a rabbit's, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help smiling. It was true that the saying, every festive season, one would think twice of one's loved ones. Even though Niet Qianyu usually behaved like an adult, it was only at this moment that Zhang Xiaohua realized that she was just a little girl who had just turned 12. Zhang Xiaohua had given Niet Qianyu the name Little Fish that day. He had wanted to call her Little Rabbit, but there were no similar words in her name. Therefore, he could only take a step back and call her Little Yu as Little Fish. Anyway, it was Niet Qianyu who asked him to call her Little Fish. What did it have to do with Zhang Xiaohua? At first, Niet Qianyu was very happy, thinking that Zhang Xiaohua finally called her by her nickname. However, after listening carefully, she realized that it was not her imagination. Therefore, she clung to Zhang Xiaohua and begged him to change it. However, until now, didn't Zhang Xiaohua still call her Little Fish? Thinking of Niet Qianyu's red eyes, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think of the occasion when he celebrated Niet Qianyu's birthday. Before the three of them entered Tanha City, they had told each other their ages. At that time, Niet Qianyu said that she was going to celebrate her 12th birthday in a month. At that time, Zhang Xiaohua only felt that this little girl who was not even 12 years old had more experience than him. He could not compare with her at all. However, on that day, he suddenly had this idea on a whim. After counting the days, wasn't it the little girl's 12th birthday? That day, when they passed by a rural town, Zhang Xiaohua saw that Niet Qianyu and Little Orange seemed to have forgotten about it. Therefore, he got off the car at the last minute and went to an inn to buy 12 red eggs for Niet Qianyu. Yes, I remember when I was in Guozhuang House. Didn't my mother cook eggs for me on my birthday? Since today is Niet Qianyu's birthday, I naturally have to buy her boiled red eggs. This was also the only thing Zhang Xiaohua bought with her own money along the way. Thinking back to the time when he saw Niet Qianyu's face full of surprise and gratitude, Zhang Xiaohua felt happy in his heart. After all, the price of 12 copper coins was reduced to 11 copper coins by him, and he even won the little girl's laughter. How could he not be happy? That day, Niet Qianyu was tearing up while eating the eggs, as if the eggs were the most delicious thing in the world. Thinking of her teary eyes, Zhang Xiaohua curls her lips secretly. Eating 6 eggs at one time? Isn't she afraid of choking? No wonder her eyes turned red when she cried. It would be a pity if she wasn't called Little Rabbit. As Zhang Xiaohua thought of the interesting things that happened along the way, the silhouette of Pingyang City appeared in her vision. In the snowy twilight, Pingyang City was still as majestic as ever. However, the people had changed. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes couldn't help but turn red. Galloping into the city, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. She found Nin in a more remote area of Pingyang City. It was the new year now, and the inn's business wasn't very good. Seeing that there were guests, the innkeeper was very happy. This was the first business of the new year, and they had booked an independent courtyard. According to the coachman, They were going to stay for a few more days. Naturally, the innkeeper was very attentive to them and tried his best to flatter the two ladies. However, after a while, seeing that the two ladies were following Zhang Xiaohua's lead, he realized that he had misjudged them. He immediately changed his attitude and walked towards Zhang Xiaohua. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have the patience for this. She drove the carriage to the courtyard and left the odd beasts and the black horse in the care of the innkeeper. She unloaded the items from the carriage and put them in a room. She didn't need the innkeeper to find help. Seeing this, the innkeeper naturally knew what to do. He instructed the shop assistants to do what they were supposed to do and quickly left, so as not to disturb the three of them in the courtyard. Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had unloaded the items from the carriage, unlike in the past where she would leave everything in the carriage for the night in order to make it easier for them to travel in the morning, Nya, Qinyu, and Xiao Jizzy's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that Pingyang City is the place where he is going to do his business? Indeed, after Nya Qinyu and Xiao Jizzy had finished packing and were waiting for their meal, Zhang Xiaohua pushed the door open and entered. She smiled and said, "It's the 5th day of the Lunar New Year now. I have already asked the inn to make dumplings for you. You must eat your fill later." Nya Qinyu stood up and asked, "Big brother Rin, from what you said, it seems that you don't intend to eat with us later." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, "I still have something to do and will go out for a while. I may be back late tonight. You guys can eat by yourselves." "Back tonight? Big brother Rin, are you going to do something?" Nya Qinyu asked anxiously. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and didn't answer. Nya Qinyu blinked and said, "Big brother Rin, be careful." Zhang Xiaohua nodded and turned to leave the room. She walked into the snowy night in a few steps. 2 pairs of concerned eyes followed him from inside the house until his figure disappeared into the darkness. Nya Qinyu turned around and asked, "Xiao Jizzy, do you think Big brother Rin is going to do something tonight?" Xiao Jizzy smiled and said, "Miss, how would I know? But seeing that he didn't answer you, it seems to be the case. But from what he said, he will be back tonight. Does that mean that we can continue our journey to Carefree City tomorrow? But since we can leave tomorrow, why should we unload the things in the carriage?" Xiao Jizzy smiled bitterly and said, "We don't have to worry about these things. Miss, you just focus on eating dumplings. I heard that the dumplings in the north are different from those in Carefree City. You have to try more dumplings later." Nya Qinyu looked disappointed and murmured, "No matter how delicious it is, can it be better than red eggs?" If Zhang Xiaohua was here, she would definitely refute her. Of course, braised pork is better than red eggs. Unfortunately, he was on the way to Misty Mountain Villa and didn't know about Nya Qinyu's girlish feelings. Yes, Zhang Xiaohua was walking to Misty Mountain Villa. The sky had already darkened, and the snow continued to fall endlessly. It had already covered the sun, and now it was no different from the night. There were few people on the streets, and they were all wearing new clothes and hiding in their houses to enjoy the rare New Year's atmosphere. Zhang Xiaohua did not intend to use the levitation technique or the earth escape technique, because his thoughts were now very chaotic. He was somewhat anxious to see the Misty Mountain Villa and the Huanxi Mountain Villa, but he was also somewhat afraid. This kind of contradictory mood could only be slowly calmed down by walking in empty streets and alleys and walking in the dark night. Zhang Xiaohua walked out of Pingyang City alone in the snow. The sky was also dark, and there weren't many people in the city. Even if there were people hurriedly passing by in the snow, they wouldn't pay too much attention to him. Otherwise, wouldn't it be shocking if he didn't have an umbrella in his hand and snow on his body? Walking on the even more spacious road outside the city, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly stopped. He seemed to have figured something out. He looked up at the dark night sky and the snowflakes that floated in from time to time. He turned back to look at the footprints he had left on the snow. They had already been covered by the rapidly falling snowflakes. He then looked at the snow-white road in front of him that didn't have any traces. Zhang Xiaohua's lips curled into a smile. "I've walked on the road behind me and left traces, but they won't last long. What kind of thing in this world can last long? It's just a matter of time. I haven't walked on the road ahead. It's up to me to decide what kind of traces I want to leave. They can be the same as the footprints behind me, or... At the thought of this, Zhang Xiaohua floated up and used the levitation technique. He leaped into the air and flew forward like a deity. I can also be different from before and not leave any traces on the road. Without destruction, there can be no construction. This must be the case. The Misty School has long been on the decline in the pugilistic world. It's a miracle that it has survived for so many years. In the pugilistic world, survival of the fittest is the most realistic thing. It's normal that the three sects would join forces to destroy it. Moreover, the Dalan Temple and the incense cult actually allowed Huyuni to escape from Ethereal Peak with the descendants of the Misty School. This is an anomaly. Could it be that they let them go because they are all descendants of the immortal Tao? Or is there something else going on? The Misty School is now as broken as it can be. However, the foundation of Misty Heights is still there. It's just that it's been occupied by the Righteous Alliance. The two leaders of the Righteous Alliance have been crippled. I don't know what's going on now. They probably won't have any extra thoughts on Misty Heights. It's not impossible for the Misty School to rise again. If there is such a day, I believe the ethereal sect will prosper once again. However, sect leader O has committed suicide. The Misty School has lost its backbone. Only 3 of the 6 Misty Tigers are left. 2 of them have been crippled. Huyuni is also seriously injured and his martial arts have been greatly reduced. The eldest disciple of the sect leader, Zhang Changyue, has also committed suicide. Sigh, it's like a plate of loose sand now. Forget it. After I send little fishy home, I'll go to the incense cult and find second brother first. I'm also not a disciple of the Misty School. Why should I worry about this for no reason? Although Misty Heights was quite a distance away from Pingyang City, Zhang Xiaohua quickly arrived in front of the archway of Misty Heights with her levitation technique. Zhang Xiaohua stood in front of the straight road and couldn't help but think of the scene when she first came here. Sigh, things remain the same, but people have changed. In the darkness, the smooth road was covered with white snow and reflected white light. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and walked up. It was as if she wanted to relive the feelings of that day. Zhang Xiaohua slowly walked towards the archway of Misty Heights and released her divine sense. Perhaps it was because it was the new year or because it had been many years since the Misty School was destroyed, the Righteous Alliance's protection had already been lax. Tonight, there weren't any disciples of the Righteous Alliance guarding the archway. When Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense saw the 2 ancient words Misty on the archway, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. -3. Chapter 366. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense felt that the word Misty on the archway of the Misty Mountain Villa was abnormal. He immediately floated towards the archway without touching the ground. When he reached the bottom of the archway, he stood with his hands behind his back and closed his eyes. He released his divine sense and carefully observed the archway that had been standing for 10,000 years. The fluttering snowflakes were still unable to touch his body. After a long while, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly opened his eyes, and a trace of doubt flashed in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he floated to the top of the tall decorated archway and looked around in the deep night sky. After which, he used his qigong and headed east. After walking for a long time, he arrived at a deserted area. Using his divine sense, he walked into an abandoned courtyard. He searched as he walked until he reached a wall. Only then did he stop and look up and down. After thinking for a while, his body rose again and continued to follow the Misty Mountain Villa and head to another place. Just like this, Zhang Xiaohua walked around the outer area of the huge Misty Mountain Villa in a short period of time. He would stop at a dilapidated rubbish dump, a new garden, and a half-old house. Every time he arrived at a place, Zhang Xiaohua would stop for a moment and release his divine sense to observe carefully. The confusion in his eyes gradually lessened. When he returned to the front of the decorated archway, The corners of his mouth had already revealed a trace of a slight smile. The Misty School is indeed a big sect that has been passed down for 10,000 years. This archway is actually the eye of the Six Directions Annihilation Formation. It's a pity that, for some reason, the other 5 eyes of the formation have been destroyed, and this protective formation did not have any effect. Otherwise, even if the Aroma sect, the Dahlin Temple, and the Alliance of Righteous Sects joined forces, they would not be able to break in. This so-called Six Directions Annihilation Formation is a top-killing formation in the records of Fire Dragon Immortal. It requires 6 people of the Immortal Tao to use different methods to attack the 6 eyes of the formation at the same time for it to be effective. The Qi of heaven and earth is scarce. Where can we find 6 people of the Immortal Tao? This formation should be indestructible. Oh, I forgot. Since the Qi of heaven and earth is scarce, where does the Qi of heaven and earth come from? If you have some primeval stones, that's fine, but does this Misty School not have enough primeval stones? However, look at the 5 abandoned array cores just now. They are all traces of man-made destruction. Some of them have been forcibly demolished to build houses and gardens. Some of them have even been turned into garbage dumps. Alas, man-made disasters are worse than natural disasters. This is the consequence of destroying the environment, forcibly demolishing and building, and illegal construction. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the misty mountain villa with countless lights in front of him. This time he had come here to explore and see what was going on. Now that he had been delayed in front of the decorated archway, he had wasted too much time. Seeing that it was getting late, Zhang Xiaohua prepared to go back. However, when his eyes turned to the Huanxi mountain villa next to him, he had an idea. He jumped down from the decorated archway and landed on the ground. After he made a gesture with his hands, his figure suddenly disappeared. When he appeared again, he was already in front of the herb field of the Huanxi mountain villa. Zhang Xiaohua jumped out of the ground and looked around. He could not help but smile bitterly. He wanted to go to the small courtyard where he lived, but he ran to the herb field. At this time, the herb field had long been deserted, and the flat land was covered with thick snow. Thinking of this place where he had struggled in the past, Zhang Xiaohua had an idea. He did not know whether Yen had found the reason why the herbs did not germinate. Thinking of the problem of the herbs not germinating, Zhang Xiaohua now had an incomplete idea. The growth of the herbs needed to absorb a certain amount of qi of heaven and earth. Those herbs that did not germinate must need more qi of heaven and earth. The lack of qi of heaven and earth in the herb field naturally could not provide enough qi of heaven and earth for the herbs to germinate. Of course, the herbs would not germinate. However, the spring water of the Guozhuang house was rich in qi of heaven and earth. If he could use the spring water of the Guozhuang house to water these herbs, there might be some effect. Of course, the qi of heaven and earth in the spring water from the Guozhuang house had long disappeared between heaven and earth. But where did the qi of heaven and earth in the spring water come from? Wasn't it provided by the small pieces of primordial stones at the bottom of the well? Speaking of primordial stones, how much qi of heaven and earth did the primordial stone in Zhang Xiaohua's purse provide? Therefore, in Zhang Xiaohua's mind, if he could put a piece of primordial stone in the water and use the water to water the herbs that did not germinate, it should be possible. However, this idea was just an idea now, and there would be no day for it to be put into practice. Didn't the Decent Alliance say that they would not interfere with everything in the Huanxi villa? Why is the herb field deserted? Zhang Xiaohua was a little depressed. Immediately, he spread out his divine awareness and carefully observed. Of course, he did not want to look at the misty villa. The Huanxi villa was his old place and his first step in Jianghu. How could he not have deep feelings for it? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's mouth showed a smile again. His body did not move, but suddenly, like a gust of wind, he flew to his own small courtyard. In Zhang Xiaohua's earliest hut, the barefoot brother Ma was still sitting on his messy kong, scratching his feet and drinking a little wine. From time to time, he would pick up a few peanuts from the plate on the kong and put them into his mouth. On the Kong opposite him, the honest Luo Huan was sitting in a corner of the Kong. Beside him were several young men in green clothes and hats. They were all staring at Ma Jing without blinking, as if they were listening to something. When Zhang Xiaohua passed by the hut in the small courtyard, she heard a few words floating from inside. You don't know. That year, Brother Shi and I were working in the field, helping our manor lord to plant rare medicinal herbs. Then we saw several big monks and several men from Jianghu descending from the sky. I was very shocked, but I couldn't ruin the prestige of our Huanxi mountain village. So I stepped out from the crowd and asked, "Who are you?" Zhang Xiaohua looked at the hut in the small courtyard and said, "You don't know. That year, Brother Shi and I were working in the field, helping our manor lord plant rare medicinal herbs. Do you know how the monk answered?" The several people opposite him shook their heads and said in unison, "We don't know." Ma Jing let go of his feet, put the peanuts into his mouth, and said, "The monk said, 'Brother, we are from the Huanxi Villa. We are monks from the Dalan Temple. We were ordered to come to Huanxi Villa to check. Brother, please do us a favor.'" At this time a boy asked, "Brother Ma, that's not right. The monk called us benefactors. Why did he call us brother? You are not a monk." Oh, Ma Jing was a little disapproving and said, "Maybe I remembered wrongly. You think that since they were so polite I naturally couldn't be rude, so I said, 'Brother Ma, that's not right.' I heard from Brother Shi that those people were very fierce at that time. When they came to our Huanxi Villa, they searched everywhere and broke a lot of things. They also beat a lot of people. It is said that they were looking for some martial arts secret book." Another person also said, "Yes, it's the house I live in. It's said that it's been ransacked. I just don't know whether they found the martial arts secret book or not." Ma Jing impatiently put his hand in front of his nose and said, "Do you still want to hear it? If you don't want to hear it, I will go to sleep." Yes, of course we want to hear it. Didn't we all come to the villa later? We didn't have time to participate in the glorious history of the villa. We still have to rely on Brother Ma to tell us more about your glorious deeds. Humph, now you know how to respect the old and love the young? Let me tell you, that martial arts secret book definitely wasn't found. Hey, Brother Ma, we know. Brother, she said that he didn't know. Won't it be clear if you use your brain to think? If they found the martial arts secret book at that time, would they still take our villa master, to preach the incense cult? The servants said at once, "Yes, Brother Ma is right. We have been in the villa for more than 2 years, but we have never seen the villa master. I heard that our villa master is a great beauty. Brother Ma, you must have seen the villa master." Ma Jing was speechless. What kind of servants are these? They actually dare to talk about the villa master behind her back. However, villa master is indeed a great beauty. Zhang Xiaohua stood on the roof and listened to the group of servants talking nonsense. She couldn't help but secretly laugh. No, now that she thought about it, Oyen was indeed very beautiful. At that time, she was young and didn't understand. She only felt that Oyen was as kind as a sister-in-law. The servants nowadays are really good. Each generation is better than the previous. Zhang Xiaohua thought so. Then, she used her divine sense to scan the inner courtyard and was ready to leave. However, she suddenly frowned as if she saw something. Her figure flew into the inner courtyard again. When she stopped again, it was the small courtyard where she was stopped when she first entered the inner courtyard. The small courtyard was silent. There was only a dim light coming from a small house. Zhang Xiaohua stood in the middle of the courtyard and thought for a moment. She walked to the door and reached out to knock on the door. A clear voice sounded from inside. "Who is it?" "Wasn't it Qiuju?" Zhang Xiaohua said in a low voice. "Sister Qiuju, it's me. I'm Zhang Xiaohua." "Zhang Xiaohua?" Qiuju was obviously stunned. Then, as if she remembered something, she cried out in surprise. "Zhang Xiaohua, it's you. Wait a moment, you." Then she heard the sound of hurried footsteps from inside. The door of the small house opened with a chi-la sound, revealing a face full of surprise. Chiu-ju opened the door. Although she was fully prepared, she was still stunned for a moment. The tall young man in front of her had the same face as the young man in her memory. It was just that the shape of his face was a little elongated, but he had grown a lot. However, thinking about it, it had already been 4 or 5 years. Why hadn't this young man's face changed? She asked hesitantly, "Are you really Zhang Xiaohua?" Zhang Xiaohua touched her face and smiled. "Why, Sister Chiuju, I heard that my face didn't change much. Don't tell me you can't recognize me?" "No, it's just—" At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua said, "Sister Chiuju, I even hung clothes for you in the past. Don't you remember?" -3. Chapter 367. How could Chiuju not know that the young man in front of her was Zhang Xiaohua from back then? She covered her mouth and laughed. She moved aside and said, "Xiaohua, come in quickly." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and entered Chiuju's room. The layout of the room in the inner courtyard was obviously different from the small room Zhang Xiaohua used to live in. If the room was a brick bed to sleep on, Chiuju would not have let Zhang Xiaohua in so late at night. This was obviously a small room, similar to a living room. A small table was placed in the middle and chairs were placed around it. Zhang Xiaohua entered the room and found a chair to sit on. Chiuju picked up the teapot from the side and poured a cup of hot tea. She smiled and said, "Xiaohua, drink a cup of hot tea to warm your body." Zhang Xiaohua reached out to take the cup. He took a sip and was about to put it down when Chiuju said, "Don't put it down. Just hold it like this. It can warm your hands." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. He smiled and said, "Sister Chiuju is indeed attentive." Although he was not afraid of cold or heat, he still held the cup with both hands. He was about to speak when Chiuju said, "Xiaohua, where have you been these years? I remember 5 years ago, I heard from Sister Chiotong that you went missing and were killed by a group of bandits. He, I'm not talking about you. Xiaohua, you learned a lot of martial arts from Captain He, but you couldn't even beat a group of bandits." Seeing that Zhang Xiaohua had returned safely without missing an arm or leg, Chiuju naturally mocked him without holding back. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Sister Chiuju is wrong. There were hundreds and thousands of bandits. I was just one person. How could I beat them? Unless I had 3 heads and 6 arms." Chiuju said, "With your small body back then, you wouldn't be able to beat them even if you had 9 heads and 36 arms, let alone 3 heads and 6 arms." At this point, she covered her mouth and laughed. Then she said, "Oh right, tell Sister what happened at that time. Gang leader O sent a lot of people to look for you, but there was no news of you. Miss and Sister Chiu Tong thought that you couldn't come back, so they were sad for a long time. Alas, if they could see you coming back to Huanqi Villa today, they would be very happy." Zhang Xiaohua thought for a moment and said, "Actually, there's not much to say about my story. At that time, I encountered bandits who were doing bad things and kidnapped a girl. I thought that I could be considered to have learned martial arts, so I went with second brother to the bandits' stronghold to save her. We did manage to save her, but we were discovered by the Tenryus sect and were captured." Tenryus sect? Chiuju was puzzled. "What sect is that? I don't think I've heard of it before." Zhang Xiaohua said, "There are countless sects in Jianghu. It's normal that Sister Chiuju hasn't heard of them." Then what? The Tenryus sect actually captured you for 5 years? You're just a child. They're too inhumane." Zhang Xiaohua giggled and said, "Sister Chiuju, I'm not that young." Chiuju smiled and didn't say anything. Zhang Xiaohua continued, "Actually, not long after they captured me, I found a chance to escape. However, I didn't escape on land, but on the vast sea. I drifted to an island alone and didn't return to land until recently." "Ah." Chiuju widened her eyes in surprise and asked incredulously, "Xiaohua, you actually went to sea and spent 5 years alone on a deserted island?" "Yes, Sister Chiuju. Actually, it's nothing. I wasn't used to it at first, but I got used to it after a while." "Really? Alas, poor child! Qiuju's motherly love burst forth in an instant. She felt that Zhang Xiaohua's experience was unfair. She said, "Fortunately, you're finally back. Well, that's good. Stay in Huanqi Villa from now on and don't go anywhere else. By the way, when did you return to the villa? Why didn't I hear Qiuxiang mention it? I met Tian Zhongxi in the afternoon, but he didn't mention it. You didn't just come back, did you?" Several questions in a row fully showed Qiuju's concern. Qiuxiang? Zhang Xiaohua was also surprised and couldn't help asking, "Who is Qiuxiang?" Oh, seeing this, Qiuju said with a smile, "You really just came back to the villa. You haven't seen Sister Qiuxiang, right? Well, I guess Tian Zhongxi wants to take you to see her tomorrow morning." Speaking of this, there was a trace of sadness on her face. She said, "Tian Zhongxi must have told you about the Misty School. Since Miss and Sister Qiutong went to preach the incense cult with Madame Gang, our Huanqi Villa has been temporarily taken over by Qiuxiang. Alas, she has been in charge for 3 years. However, Xiaohua, don't worry. Although you haven't seen Qiuxiang, you're still a senior in Huanqi Villa. I have a good relationship with Qiuxiang. Tomorrow morning, I'll tell her in advance in case she refuses when Tian Zhongxi goes to report to her, or it will be too late for me to go there." Hearing Qiuju's words, Zhang Xiaohua felt warm in her heart. She had only met Qiuju a few times, but she took good care of her because she used to be a manservant in Huanqi Villa. Her true feelings were rare. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, "Let's talk about these things later. I want to ask Sister Qiuju, do you know the whereabouts of my second brother, Zhang Xiaohu? Is he dead or alive?" Qiuju thought for a moment and sighed. "I'll tell you the truth about your second brother's whereabouts. Xiaohua, I really don't know. When the Misty School was besieged by the 3 factions, I only heard the faint sound of fighting in the villa. I don't know the specific situation of the enemy. Moreover, in the end, the disciples of our Misty School were taken back by Madame Gang and brought back to preach the incense cult. I didn't see them, so naturally I don't have any news about Zhang Xiaohu." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, "Then what about the situation of Miss O and Sister Qiutong, and the current situation of our Huanqi Villa?" Qiuju's face showed a worried expression again and said, "Our Huanqi Villa and Piaomiao Villa have always been one, and we are related to each other. The Misty School was destroyed by the incense cult, the Dalan Temple, and the Righteous Alliance. Half of the disciples died on the spot. Although elder who escaped, the rest of the disciples were mediocre in martial arts, and some of them were destroyed. They were all taken back by the incense cult. Although our Huanqi Villa was protected by Nun Jingyi of the incense cult, and the other 2 factions had no choice but to yield, Miss was taken away by them. Sister Qiutong couldn't bear to part with Miss, so she went with them. The other sisters and I also wanted to go, but Miss didn't allow it, so we stayed." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua asked Sister Qiuju, "Do you know where the incense cult is?" This, Qiuju shook her head and said, "I don't know about this. That day there were many of them, and they set off together. When I bid farewell to Miss, I didn't hear her mention it. I reckon that Miss herself might not know about it. However, their carriage was heading towards the south. How is the villa now? Is it the same as before?" Zhang Xiaohua asked. Qiuju still smiled bitterly and said, "Huanqi Villa has left the Misty School. How can it be the same as before? Although the 3 factions have an agreement that they can't interfere with Huanqi Villa, the Righteous Alliance is right next to Huanqi Villa and has occupied Piaomiao Villa. Every move of our villa is under the surveillance of the Righteous Alliance. According to our guards, a few years ago, the villa was surrounded by their disciples, and they were monitoring both openly and secretly. It's only this year that they relaxed their vigilance. However, when you came back today, you must have been interrogated at the entrance of the villa. Even now, it's the new year, they still left people to not let our villa have a peaceful time." "Is that so? What about inside the villa?" Zhang Xiaohua asked again. "There's no change in the villa. Some people saw that Huanchi Villa has no future and quietly ran away. These people are really heartless. Mistreated them so well in the past, but they abandoned their conscience and ran away. Xiaohua, you don't know, many of them have sold themselves to the villa. However, under the intervention of the Righteous Alliance, nothing is settled. Zhang Xiaohua smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Looking at Zhang Xiaohua, Qiuju smiled and said, "You still have a good conscience. Knowing that the villa is in such a state, you still came back. Miss and elder sister Qiu Tong treated you well in the past. However, the medicinal field in our villa has long been deserted. They are preparing to plant crops. Xiaohua, you came from a farming family, so you must be very proficient in this aspect. Let me talk to Qiuxiang tomorrow. Why don't you be Tian Zhongshi's assistant?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled faintly and said, "That's right, elder sister Qiuju. Where did elder Yu go?" "Oh, elder Yu. He naturally followed Miss to the incense cult. Although he is the steward of the villa, he still has to protect Mississippi. Elder sister Qiu Tong can only serve Mississippi. If it's protection, it can only be done by elder Yu." "Oh, I see." Zhang Xiaohua touched her nose with her finger. "There are a lot of changes in the villa. However, as long as you work hard like before, your livelihood will definitely not be a problem. Xiaohua, Miss and Qiu Tong are not here. If you have any problems, feel free to tell elder sister. Although elder sister is not Qiuxiang, I can still speak for you. I definitely won't let you suffer. Hee. Then I'll thank elder sister Qiuju first." Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "However, I didn't come back to the villa this time. I haven't gone home to see my parents," and Qiuju smiled and said, "You came to the villa before going home. Xiaohua, Miss really has good taste. It doesn't matter. I'll ask Tian Chongshi to give you a month's leave. Go back and reunite with your parents. It won't be too late to go back to the villa." Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Elder sister Qiuju, can you let me finish my words?" Qiuju smiled and said, "I haven't seen you for many years. I'm happy to see the old people in the villa. All right, you say it. I won't interrupt." Zhang Xiaohua said, "Elder sister Qiuju, after I go home, I don't plan to go back to the villa." "What?" Qiuju's expression changed a little. Then she smiled bitterly and said, "That's right. The villa is like this now. It's normal that you don't come back. It doesn't matter. Xiaohua, if you have time, just come back and see your old friends in the villa." Zhang Xiaohua said helplessly, "Elder sister, didn't you say that you won't interrupt?" Only then did Qiuju stop interrupting. She didn't answer. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "I plan to go home to see my parents, and then go to find Miss and elder sister Qiu Tong." "Ah." Qiuju couldn't help but interrupt again. She said in surprise, You really want to find them?" "Yes." Zhang Xiaohua said, "I haven't seen them for so many years. I don't know if they are still alive in the world." -3. Chapter 368. Miss really didn't misjudge you. Miss really didn't misjudge you. Qiuju couldn't help but repeat this sentence, which made Zhang Xiaohua blush a little. However, his heart was calm. "Nonsense. I'm going to save second brother. Of course, I can also save O Yen and Qiu Tong. Qiuju is not wrong. But Qiuju immediately realized something and said, "But the people of Chuanxiang cult are very good at martial arts. How can you see Miss?" "Well, if you say that you are a servant of Huan Shi Manor, maybe they will let you in. But how can you go to Chuanxiang cult? Do you know where Chuanxiang cult is? Didn't you just ask me this question?" Qiuju said a few and asked a few more questions, which hit the nail on the head. Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile, "When I came back this time, I happened to meet a disciple of the Misty School called Chu Yunfei. He said that when he went back, he would ask Elder Hu. If he knew the address of Chuanxiang cult, he would find a way to tell me. Then I would know how to get there." "Oh, is that so?" Qiuju nodded and said, I really envy you, Xiaohua. If I were a man, I would also be like you and go see Mississippi," Zhang Xiaohua said. If Choju's sister was a man, Miss wouldn't dare to let you see her. Ha ha! Choju suddenly realized and covered her mouth to laugh. She had never been so happy in the past few years. Then Choju asked, Xiaohua, where do you live? I remember that your little house has been occupied by the new servant. I don't know where your things are. Zhang Xiaohua was still holding the teacup that was gradually losing its heat. She said, It's like this, Choju's sister. I'm not going back to the manor this time, so I didn't inform Brother Shi. Also, I have to go back later. And Choju frowned and said, Then you are, Zhang Xiaohua said with a smile. Didn't Choju's sister just say that Captain He and I? Oh, right, where is Captain He? How is he? Zhang Xiaohua suddenly realized that she hadn't asked about this initiator yet. Perhaps he had already subconsciously regarded He Tianshu as a martyr in the Misty School. Well, Choju also shook her head and said, Captain, he was not in Huan Shi Villa at that time. There were many casualties in the Misty School, so I don't know where Captain He is. Moreover, when the fragrance cult left, the disciples of the Misty School were divided into many small teams, which were all guarded by the disciples of the fragrance cult. Oh, I see. Zhang Xiaohua sighed and said, I hope Captain He is fine. Then she explained, Didn't I learn martial arts from Captain He? Although I'm not as good as the real disciples of the Misty School, I've made some progress. Tonight, I came directly from outside the villa, so I didn't see Brother Shi and the others. Oh, I see. Choju understood and advised, It's probably the New Year now, and it's snowing heavily tonight. The disciples of the Righteous Alliance have all returned to the villa, so they didn't keep watch outside. Xiaohua, I heard that the disciples of the Righteous Alliance are very powerful. Be careful when you go out later. Also, next time when you enter the villa, don't walk around arrogantly. Just come directly from the main door and say that you're looking for me. You're not a disciple of the Misty School, so they probably won't make things difficult for you. Remember? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, I know, Sister Choju. The next time I come in, I'll use your name. Oh, right, Sister Choju. Don't tell anyone about me entering the villa this time. If the people of the Righteous Alliance find out, they might. Choju smiled and said, I know that. Actually, there might be people from the Righteous Alliance in the villa. Sister, you're not that stupid. Zhang Xiaohua put the teacup on the table and stood up. Since that's the case, I'll go back first. After I see Miss O and Sister Chiotong, I'll go back to the villa and tell you about their situation. Chuju also stood up and said, Okay, Xiaohua, if you see them, say hello to them. Tell them that I miss them a lot in the villa. I'll definitely say hello. Sister Choju, I'll go now. Okay, Xiaohua. Why didn't you bring an umbrella or something like that? It's snowing so heavily, don't freeze your body. Wait, I'll find you an umbrella. Seeing that Choju was still treating him as the youth from 5 years ago, Zhang Xiaohua felt warm inside. He said, There's no need, Sister Choju. When have you ever seen a person walking around with an umbrella in his hand? Choju patted her forehead and smiled. I didn't know about that, haha. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the door and turned back. Sister Choju, you don't have to come over. It's windy outside. Don't catch a cold. Choju said, Xiaohua hasn't been here for 5 years. I have to send you to the door. As she spoke, she was about to walk over. However, as soon as she took a step, she suddenly shouted, Oh, Xiaohua, wait a moment. When I saw you just now, I was so focused on talking to you that I forgot about something. Alas, but it's just a passing cloud. With that, she turned and walked into the inner room. Zhang Xiaohua was surprised. She walked back to the table and waited in confusion. After a while, she saw Choju walk out with an envelope and a small paper box in her hands. As she walked, she blew the dust off the envelope and the box. Choju came to the table and put the envelope and the box on the table. She smiled and said, These 2 things belong to Chiotong. Take them and give them to her when you see her. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. She said, Sister Choju, since they belong to Sister Chiotong, why didn't Sister Chiotong take them away that day? Didn't you say something passing cloud just now? Haha. Chu-ju heard and smiled. These things were originally given to Chiu-tong by someone else. However, she left in a hurry that day, and I forgot about it. If you didn't mention that you were going to see Chiu-tong today, I wouldn't have remembered. All right, I'll tell you in detail. Actually, the matter was very simple. On the day that the Misty School was besieged by the three factions, Misty Mountain Villa was facing a formidable enemy. However, Huanxi Mountain Villa was no different from usual. Everyone in the villa was busy with their own matters. Choji was in the kitchen preparing something for her young mistress when she saw a rather handsome male disciple of the Misty School come to her with these two things. He wanted her to help him pass these two things to Chiu-tong. At that time, Choji was very puzzled. Chiu-tong was just at the main hall of the inner manor. Couldn't he just go there himself? Why did he have to do it? However, when she saw the male disciple's face that was so red that it was about to drip blood, Chu-ju somewhat understood. Moreover, the male disciple also said that this was a birthday present that he had prepared for Chiu-tong. Chiu-tong's birthday was 2 weeks later, and the male disciple was about to leave for some matters. He probably wouldn't be back for a while. Hence, he asked Choju to pass it to him. He especially said that he wanted Choju to pass it to Chiu-tong on her birthday. This way he could show his sincerity and perhaps give Chiu-tong a surprise. Naturally, Choju agreed to this kind of thing immediately. Moreover, she even teased the male disciple at that time. At that time, the male disciple was even more embarrassed. However, Choju was so busy that she didn't have time to spare. Hence, she asked the male disciple to put the letter and the box on the shelf in the kitchen first. When she was done, she would take it back to her room. The male disciple thanked her happily and left the box behind. He even specially told her that he would personally pass it to Chiu-tong on her birthday. How could Choju forget such a thing? Of course. She waved her hand and told him not to worry. However, things were far beyond her expectations. Before she finished her work in the kitchen and was still wondering when Chiu-tong found a lover from the Misty School, the news that the Misty Mountain Villa was attacked by the three factions came. This kind of news was like a thunderbolt. Of course, Choju forgot some small things. She hurriedly put down her work and ran to find Oyen. At that time, Oyen had already been taken to the Misty Peak by Openg. Naturally, Choju couldn't see Oyen. At this time, the Huanxi Mountain Villa, which was part of the Misty School, was also attacked by the three factions. Choju and the others were forced to return to their rooms and couldn't go anywhere. After a long time, a group of female disciples from the Fragrant Religion, a few monks, and a few disciples from the Righteous Alliance came like wolves and tigers. They searched everyone's rooms and turned everything upside down. No one knew what they were looking for. Choju didn't dare to ask and just let them do what they wanted. Later, she found out that they were looking for a martial arts secret manual. Choju found it funny. There were many such things in the Misty Mountain Villa. She had never heard of it in the Huanxi Mountain Villa, let alone in the servants' rooms. What followed was a dark life. The Misty School was destroyed, and Oyen was brought back to the Fragrant Religion. Chiu-tong and Elder Yu also went with her. Chiu-ju only saw Chiu-tong once when she was sending them off. How could she remember that a male disciple from the Misty School had secretly sent Chiu-tong a message? 2 weeks after Oyen left, on Chiu-tong's birthday, Chiu-ju suddenly remembered this matter. She quickly ran to the kitchen, which she hadn't seen for a long time, and found the letter and small paper box thrown crookedly in the middle of a pile of seasonings. Looking at the letter and small paper box, Chiu-ju couldn't help but feel sad. Thinking back to that day, that male disciple must have known that he didn't have much of a chance of survival, so he mustered up the courage to confess to Chiu-tong. Chiu-tong, on the other hand, didn't know that there was a male disciple from the Misty School who secretly admired her. No matter whether that male disciple was dead or alive, Chiu-tong had to know of his feelings. Hence, Chiu-ju still took these two things back. She wanted to personally hand them to Chiu-tong when she saw her in the future. However, She waited for 3 years, and Chiu Tong never came back. Chiu Ju also forgot about the letter and paper box, and only covered with dust every day. After hearing Chiu Ju's story, Zhang Xiaohua looked at the letter that didn't seem old and smiled. This is an interesting story. Don't worry, Big Sister Chiu Ju. I will definitely personally hand these 2 things to Big Sister Chiu Tong. I just don't know the name of that Misty School disciple. -3. Chapter 369. Chiu Ju smiled. How would I know? I did ask him. But how could I tell Chiu Tong his name if I didn't know? That disciple said that Chiu Tong would know as long as she saw the letter. I thought about it and didn't ask any more. Is that so? Zhang Xiaohua smiled. Won't we know if we see it now? Chiu Ju glared at Zhang Xiaohua and said, Xiaohua, you're not the child you used to be. Why are you still saying such irrelevant things? Not to mention that this is Sister Chiu Tong's privacy. Without her permission, you can't open it. Also, you know that this might be a suicide note left behind by a disciple who died for the sect. If you don't give it to Sister Chiu Tong and open it yourself, aren't you insulting her spirit in heaven? Zhang Xiaohua was taken aback. Then he straightened his face and said, Big Sister Chiu Ju is right. Although I was just joking, I didn't think too much about it. Don't worry. I will definitely keep these 2 items well. When I see Big Sister Chiu Tong, I will personally hand them to her. Zhang Xiaohua carefully took the letter and the small paper box. He put them in his arms and said, Sister Chiu Ju, it's late. I'm leaving. Chiu Ju smiled. Okay, go. Be careful. If possible, come back and tell me about them. Okay, Sister Chiu Ju. Don't lose them. I know. No problem. After saying that, Zhang Xiaohua waved his hand and walked into the snowflakes floating in the dark night. Chiu Ju walked to the door and watched as Zhang Xiaohua walked to the door and disappeared. She closed the door and sighed deeply. Not long after, the lights in Chiu Ju's house went out. Everything fell into darkness. Zhang Xiaohua came out of Chiu Ju's room and went around the wall. First, he used the earth escape technique to walk for a while. Then he jumped out of the ground and used the levitation technique to go back to the inn. When he came out of the Huan Shi mountain villa, he used his divine sense to observe for a while. There was no one watching the entrance of the Huan Shi mountain villa. Perhaps, as Chiu Ju said, it was the New Year's night, and the people of the Righteous Alliance must be tired of it. After returning to the small room in the inn, Zhang Xiaohua first carefully took out the letter and paper box from her bosom. Then, she used her divine sense to put them into the space of her money pouch. Only then did she sit down cross-legged and digest the information she had just received. She took out some primeval stones and began to cultivate the Carefree Heart Sutra. The next morning, after practicing the fist of the North Star outside, Zhang Xiaohua led Huan Huan to the courtyard and returned to her room to comprehend the way of heaven. It was not until the sky was bright and she heard some noises in the room next door that she went out and knocked on Nie Qianyu's door. Xiao Orange, who opened the door, was very happy to see Zhang Xiaohua. She asked, Children, have you finished your business? Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, No, I haven't done it yet. I just went out for a walk yesterday. After letting Zhang Xiaohua into the room, Nie Qianyu asked, In that case, is Brother Ren going to do it today? Zhang Xiaohua nodded and said, Yes, Miss Nie is smart. I'm here to say goodbye. How many days will Brother Ren be gone? Nie Qianyu asked anxiously. Well, Zhang Xiaohua frowned and said, It's a little complicated and I'm not sure. I estimate that it will take at least 10 days. Ah, so long? Nie Qianyu almost cried out. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, That can't be helped. Miss Nie, it's not a small matter. I underestimated 10 days, maybe 20 days. However, this Pingyang city is already very far away from Tanha City and Wuri City. Even if those people who are chasing after you sent a lot of men, they wouldn't have chased you all the way here. Unless they have divine foresight, then there's no other way. Haha, even if they have great foresight, Aren't they still fooled by Brother Rin? Nya, Qinyu said with a smile. Zhang Xiaohua touched his nose and said, I'm just that amazing. Don't praise me like that. Bah! Nya, Qinyu could not help but spit and blush. Children, don't worry. I'll take care of Miss Nya here. Nothing will go wrong, Xiao Orange said tactfully. Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. This plot seemed very familiar. It was like a phrase commonly used in romance novels. Zhang Xiaohua was embarrassed and said, Ha 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 ha, okay, I'll ride Huan Huan to do something. You guys be careful. If there's nothing important, try not to go out. Oh, I forgot. Nothing will happen even if you go out. Why is that? Nya, Qinyu was puzzled. Even if you go out, the bullies in the city won't be able to see you. Ah? What do you mean? Xiao Orange was puzzled. Zhang Xiaohua did not explain and said, Okay, I've already deposited a lot of money in yesterday. It should be enough for a month. Okay, you guys stay here. I'll leave first. Oh yes. How did the dumplings taste yesterday? With that he turned and left, as if he was afraid to stay here any longer. Sure enough, before he reached the door, Xiao Orange muttered, Children is really strange. Yesterday's dumplings did taste good. Why did he only think of asking now? On the other side, Nya Qinyu seemed to have understood something. Her eyes were wide open, and her soft voice was a little high-pitched. She shouted, Ren Xiaoyao, how dare you say that we're not beautiful? Zhang Xiaohua heard and did not stop moving. She laughed and said, Miss Nya, you've wronged me. I didn't say that. Xiao Orange, who was beside her, also asked curiously, When did children say that? Nya, Qinyu stomped her feet and said, Didn't you just say that the bullies in the city look down on us? Didn't you understand? Ah, Rin Xiaoyao. Xiao Orange did not call him children anymore. What nonsense. A girl's face was the most precious thing. How could she not be angry when you said that? The two of them chased after him to the door. Zhang Xiaohua had already urged the deer to leave a trail of footprints on the thick snow. A burst of laughter could be heard from afar. Surprisingly, the two people who chased after him did not look angry. They were both muttering to themselves, Look at what Xiaoxia did. Even a joke is so profound. Even his laughter is so charming. Sigh, if Zhang Xiaohua heard this, wouldn't she fall off the deer directly? The road from Pingyang City to Lu Town was not short. Although the deer could run fast, it was still snowing heavily. It would take at least 3 to 4 days to get back. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua was not in a hurry. The Guozhuang house was just ahead. 4 to 5 years had passed. Why should she be anxious now? Therefore, amidst the snowflakes on the quiet road, Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged on the deer. She closed her eyes and started to cultivate. At this moment, what Zhang Xiaohua wanted to cultivate the most was the Heaven Dao. The feeling of understanding the Heaven Dao was so good that it was hard for Zhang Xiaohua to give up. However, ever since he had reached the 9th level of the Big Dipper magical fist, there would be a bone-honing flow every time he practiced it. He did not have a target for his future cultivation. At that time he had a sudden inspiration and thought of practicing it from the end to the end again. However, there was no need to recite the reversal of the fist technique. He only needed to read it word by word. Therefore, he did not have the time to think about it carefully. This journey from Pingyang City to Lu Town could be made use of. The 108 forms of the Big Dipper magical fist had left a deep impression in Zhang Xiaohua's mind. The little man who knew how to perform the fist technique had not appeared for a long time. However, it was not difficult to recall it again. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua disassembled all the 108 forms in her mind. She wanted to recombine these forms. She wanted to take out the last form of the form first, and then connect the other 107 forms to this form one by one. However, after going through all the forms, there was not a single form that could be connected. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but frown. Could it be that her idea was wrong? Or could it be that she had to find a new fist technique form from the many martial arts fist manuals? Yes, it was possible. Didn't sect leader O say before that the stellar fist had 360 forms? Her Big Dipper magical fist only had 108 forms. There were still many forms missing. However, in this way there was a problem, since there were still forms that could be extracted from the fist manuals. Why couldn't she find them the first time? This was really a problem. Zhang Xiaohua could not help but open her eyes and use her fingers to rub the space between her eyebrows. At this time, there was a sudden rush of ding-dang from behind. A horse carriage caught up from behind. Zhang Xiaohua slightly turned her head. There was a small triangular flag on the carriage with the word "Fast" written on it. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and patted Huan Huan's head. Huan Huan obediently walked to the side of the road and made way for the horse carriage. As soon as Huan Huan made way, the horse carriage caught up. When it was walking side by side with Zhang Xiaohua, the coachman glanced at Zhang Xiaohua and nodded gently. Zhang Xiaohua also smiled in return. However, at this moment, she heard a cat scream from below the horse carriage. Zhang Xiaohua used her divine sense to scan the area. It was a dirty cat that had been run over by the horse carriage's wheel and was rolling around under the horse carriage. The coachman seemed to have heard it. He frowned and tightened the reins in his hand. He was about to pull the horse carriage, but immediately he released his hand. With a flick of his wrist, he shouted, "Jia." The horse carriage continued to roar and did not stop for even a moment. On the snowy ground, the pitiful cat rolled left and right. Finally, it stopped moving. Its dirty white belly was facing up. Its two hind legs were curled up and twitching. One of its front legs was placed in front of its chest, while the other was raised high. It seemed to be trying to grab something. Qijian Chinese website welcomes readers to read the latest, fastest, and hottest series of original works at Qijian. -3. Chapter 370. Seeing the hatred in the cat's eyes, Zhang Xiaohua's heart felt as if it had been struck by a heavy hammer. Looking at the dark red blood flowing from the corner of the cat's mouth and its four legs gradually stopping moving, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt a wave of sadness in his heart. When the cat had completely stopped moving, Zhang Xiaohua looked around and carefully picked up the pitiful and light little thing from the ground. He walked step by step to the side of the road until he reached the wasteland by the side of the road. After looking around, he put the cat down. Huan Huan also obediently followed him. Zhang Xiaohua took the long sword from Huan Huan's back and quickly dug an extremely deep hole in the wasteland. Zhang Xiaohua picked up the cat and carefully placed it into the deep hole, as if he was afraid of disturbing the cat's beautiful dream. Then, his heart filled with sadness, he sprinkled the soil on the cat bit by bit and murmured something. Only when all the soil was filled into the hole did Zhang Xiaohua stop. He clapped his hands and looked at the dark clouds in the sky. He sighed, "Life is so fragile." To be honest, ever since Zhang Xiaohua started practicing qi, he had been decisive in killing. Countless lives had been taken by his hands. Perhaps his killing methods were too nimble and he had never seen more blood. Moreover, the people he killed were all detestable people, so he didn't feel too burdened in his heart. But today he suddenly saw an innocent cat being run over by a carriage. This ordinary incident that couldn't be more ordinary on a normal day actually aroused his compassion. If it was said to be the backlash of his killing intent from before, it was reasonable. Life, death, life, death. Zhang Xiaohua stood with his hands in his sleeves. He looked up at the sky and murmured these two words over and over again. In an instant, the entire world seemed to be stagnant, and the snowflakes also stopped in the air. Zhang Xiaohua's mind, once again, felt the call of the heavens. At this moment, his consciousness left his body like before and gradually, slowly rose up. This time, Zhang Xiaohua had the previous experience and didn't deliberately or anxiously rise up. Instead, he slowly controlled the speed of his consciousness and spread it out to understand the feeling of the entire world. But soon after, Zhang Xiaohua discovered that his comprehension this time was different from the last time. This time, what he saw through his consciousness was not the various states of the world, but the life and death of the world. as Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness rose and strengthened, from the death of the cat at the beginning, to the birth and death of the surrounding villages, normal deaths, abnormal deaths, countless positive, negative, and positive emotions filled his consciousness. Time and space also seemed to have lost their effect at this time. Zhang Xiaohua also saw the battle between the disciples of the Misty School and the disciples of the three sects in the Misty Mountain Villa. Countless disciples held in pain. He also saw O Peng commit suicide on the Misty Peak and Yang Ruping face death calmly. Soon after, his consciousness saw even further. He saw himself brandishing his flying sword and wantonly killing more than 10 gang members of an unknown sect. He also saw himself wielding a small sword and killing 3 disciples of the Righteous Alliance. He also saw himself leaping high like a god and killing 5 unknown disciples with a long sword. He even saw himself following O Yanixing and killing the masked old man in black. Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness soared even higher, and even more battles in the Jianghu were reflected in his mind. Even more new lives were reflected in his mind. All sorts of emotions revolved around him, tempering him. It was as if the cycle of reincarnation was tempering his consciousness. At the same time, the marks left behind by the heavenly Tao became even clearer and deeper. The sky above Zhang Xiaohua's head was no longer covered in red clouds at some point in time. Instead, it was a night sky dotted with countless resplendent stars. In the distance, the sun that emitted endless light and heat was like a special star. It hung there, no different from the other celestial bodies. The starry sky became clearer, more complete, more vivid, and more lively. Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness was still rising. Although he was deliberately controlling it, it was still rising. The land that he looked down on was still endless. However, in his eyes or in his perception, there was only endless life and death, and the cycle of life and death. Perhaps it was an instant, or perhaps it was a long time. Zhang Xiaohua suddenly had a kind of enlightenment. Life, death, reincarnation, cycle. Pa! Like lightning, it instantly lit up his entire consciousness. He seemed to understand something, but also seemed to not understand something. At this moment, his consciousness accelerated once again, high up. This time, it was different from the previous time. Previously, it was a feeling of being at a loss and not knowing what to do. However, this time, he had a feeling that he had grasped something. Although he did not know what it was, he had a feeling that somewhere in the high, endless starry sky, there must be a place where he could find this feeling. However, at this moment, he forgot that at this moment, he did not seem to have the ability to search the entire starry sky. The only outcome he could face was only to be lost in the unpredictable starry sky. At this critical moment, in the distance where Zhang Xiaohua was standing, which was also the direction that Zhang Xiaohua was heading in the high starry sky, there suddenly appeared a super strong storm. This storm was not simply a storm of air, but a storm formed by the endless yuan qi of heaven and earth. The endless yuan qi of heaven and earth seemed to have appeared from an inexplicable point and immediately filled the space. The yuan qi of heaven and earth condensed continuously, and not long after, it formed 2 lifelike images, auspicious dragon and phoenix. Zhang Xiaohua's ascending consciousness could not help but cry out, and once this cry came out, his consciousness fell rapidly like the last time. However, at this time, Zhang Xiaohua did not recall the feeling of falling, but only stared at the distant dragon and phoenix formed by the yuan qi of heaven and earth. He watched as the dragon and phoenix intertwined and danced in the starry sky and slowly fell. Zhang Xiaohua's rapidly falling consciousness landed on his body, who was standing on the ground with his hands in his sleeves. Immediately, he opened his eyes as if he had been enlightened. He instantly released his consciousness, wanting to explore the yuan qi of heaven and earth in the sky. Unfortunately, although Zhang Xiaohua felt that his consciousness had improved greatly, he was still too far away from the dragon and phoenix and could not see anything useful. With a sigh, Zhang Xiaohua withdrew his consciousness and used his eyes to look at the sky in front of him, which was still covered with dark clouds and snowflakes. He could not help but shake his head and said to himself, I don't know what happened in front, which could cause a change in the yuan qi of heaven and earth, and even affect the change in the way of heaven. The way of heaven is really unpredictable. Then, ignoring the snow on the ground, he sat cross-legged and checked his gains from the oneness of heaven and man again. Sure enough, the starry sky that demonstrated the way of heaven was incomparably bright, clearer, and more inexplicably full of vitality. The way of heaven left a deeper outline in Zhang Xiaohua's consciousness, and, at the same time, left a greater accumulation. After a long while, Zhang Xiaohua opened his eyes with a smile. This smile was so vivid and seemed to be the same as a moment ago, but also seemed to be different. It seemed to have more understanding of life and death. Clapping his hands, Zhang Xiaohua stood up and looked deeply at the soil that had been covered by a thin layer of snow. There was a stray cat's body buried deep there. Yes, there was a cause and there was an effect. If he had not coincidentally witnessed the cat's death and buried its body, how could he have such an opportunity? Life and death, how could it be so easy to understand? How could the way of heaven be so easy to approach? Looking at the David's deer that was standing quietly beside him, Zhang Xiaohua floated up and patted its head calmly. Huan Huan raised its head and let out a long neigh, and happily ran back to the main road from the ground. It then walked to the center of the main road and walked forward. Zhang Xiaohua sat on Huan Huan's back and unconsciously looked back at the place where the cat had been knocked down. A thought rose from the bottom of his heart. If I could turn back time, maybe I could reach out and rescue this poor cat from under the carriage. Thinking of this, his heart suddenly moved, as if he had thought of something. After thinking about it carefully, his eyes unconsciously lit up, and he thought to himself, Cat, I really have to thank you. I just simply buried you, and you actually gave me endless benefits. If it was said that Zhang Xiaohua's cat's death, combined with his murderous aura, triggered another form of prying into the way of heaven, which was a deeper level of contact with life and death than the hundreds of forms of life, it was a guide for Zhang Xiaohua's future cultivation. What he had just learned was a direct guide for the difficult problem of practicing the fist of the North Star in his heart. Of course, it's impossible to turn back time, but the moves of the fist can be performed in reverse. The second stage of the fist of the North Star should be practiced from the end to the end. But this from the end to the end is not simply linking the last move to the first move. This has been tried before, but it doesn't work. Instead, every move has to be performed in reverse. This way, from the last move to the first move can be smoothly performed. Understanding the key point, Zhang Xiaohua could not help but think, should I erect a tombstone for the cat or give it a proper burial? But then he smiled. Separation of life and death was just a part of the way of heaven. Anything that did not break away from the way of heaven must go through this process. Sometimes the death was lighter than a goose feather. Sometimes the death was heavier than Mount Tai. To him, the cat's death was heavier than Mount Tai, but to the coachman, the cat's death was lighter than a goose feather. The cat did not care about the ceremony after its death, but he cared about the value of the cat's death. Instead of giving the cat an unimportant ceremony, it was better to keep the cat's death in his heart as a warning to himself. Death was actually very simple, as long as he pointed his flying sword, a drop of blood. Death was also very complicated. Perhaps he might not be able to comprehend it in his lifetime. This sword was related to life and death, so he must not use it lightly in the future. Alas, who in this world could understand everything? In this wilderness, the life and death of a stray cat, except for the current Zhang Xiaohua, who knew? But such a cat's death was exchanged for the lives of countless Jianghu people in the future. Even Zhang Xiaohua himself could not explain the cause and effect of this. -3. Chapter 371. On the morning of the 9th day of the first lunar month, in a forest about 10 miles away from the east gate of Lu Town, a thin and tall young man stood on the crown of a big pine tree covered in white snow, facing the rising sun. He narrowed his eyes and stared at the distant morning sun with a faint smile on his lips. After a few breaths, he jumped down from the tree and started practicing his punching skills on the flat, snowy ground. After he finished practicing a set of boxing, he did not stop. He continued with a set of boxing that was similar to the previous one. If a martial arts master could identify it carefully, he would be able to see that the last set of boxing was simply the reverse of the previous set of boxing. This young man was naturally Zhang Xiaohua, who was walking towards the Guozhuang house. Since he entered the realm of oneness of heaven and men a few days ago, he had glimpsed a corner of the rules of life and death in the way of heaven. Zhang Xiaohua's cultivation seemed to have entered another realm. However, when he carefully checked his mental cultivation, he only took a big step forward. It was not the qualitative leap that he had imagined. However, Zhang Xiaohua knew very well that he must have made great progress in an aspect that he did not know about. It was the improvement in his daily understanding of the way of heaven. Since he did not understand what it was, he knew how to practice it. That was enough. On the other hand, the death of the stray cat had awakened the direction of upgrading the fist of the North Star. Therefore, while Zhang Xiaohua continued to understand the way of heaven, he put his mind on the reversal of the fist of the North Star. After 2 days of pondering and thinking, he finally understood all the 108 moves of the fist of the North Star. Last night, Zhang Xiaohua tried it before he went to sleep. It was indeed effective. The inexplicable flow appeared from his right foot. With the moves of the fist of the North Star, it was in the opposite direction from before. It tempered the bones one by one until it reached the bones of his left foot. As a matter of fact, Zhang Xiaohua suppressed his excitement and performed the Big Dipper magical fist technique 18 times. His bones were tempered 18 times. Zhang Xiaohua stopped and summoned the David's deer. He flew up and patted Huan Huan's head. Huan Huan's 4 hooves danced in the air as it flew toward Lu Town. Zhang Xiaohua sat cross-legged on Huan Huan's back. She closed her eyes and thought, Northern Dipper Divine Fist and Reverse Northern Dipper Divine Fist are both Northern Dipper Divine Fist. Wouldn't it be too troublesome to call them Northern Dipper Divine Fist? However, if that's the case, then the Misty School's Fist of the North Star Manual will be incomplete. Thinking of the Misty School, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but feel sad for her second brother. Maybe I have to go home quickly and ask if my second brother has brought any news back home. If he hasn't, then I'll have to go to the Fragrant Cult. Haha, the Fragrant Cult is in the south. Sending Nie Qinyu, there won't be any delay. Zhang Xiaohua looked ahead and thought slowly. Suddenly, the expression in Zhang Xiaohua's eyes changed. It turned out that in the sky not far away to the right, high up in the sky, a pure white cloud had suddenly been blown away. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and immediately released his divine sense. Sure enough, under the white cloud, the originally sparse qi of heaven and earth seemed to have been blown in, becoming denser and denser. Zhang Xiaohua's dragon and phoenix, bringing prosperity, was instantly equivalent to the qi of heaven and earth phenomenon that he saw when he entered the unity of heaven and man realm a few days ago. Could it be? Zhang Xiaohua was a little confused. Something strange is happening in front. Thus, Zhang Xiaohua urged his mount and quickly moved forward. In her divine sense, the yuan qi of heaven and earth in that direction slowly became denser. When Zhang Xiaohua arrived at Lu Town, she could already see part of the body of the dragon and phoenix. This, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't understand. However, when she arrived at Lu Town, Zhang Xiaohua had to turn east, which was the direction of the yuan qi of heaven and earth. She wasn't afraid of delaying her journey back to the Guozhuang house. Zhang Xiaohua tried to release her divine sense to observe the changes in the yuan qi of heaven and earth while urging the David's deer to rush to the Guozhuang house. At this time, the David's deer, Huan Huan, also seemed to feel a trace of change in the yuan qi of heaven and earth. It was a little uneasy and was a little bit afraid to go forward. Zhang Xiaohua frowned and gently stroked Huan Huan's neck to comfort her. But the more she went forward, the more anxious Huan Huan became, as if she was extremely afraid of the things in front of her. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense had already observed that the yuan qi of heaven and earth had revealed more than half of its body. This isn't the Guozhuang house directly below the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Thinking of the yuan qi of heaven and earth, she naturally thought of the spring water that was rich in the yuan qi of heaven and earth at home. She didn't think too much. The change in the yuan qi must be related to her home. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be negligent. She patted the head of the David's deer and floated up. She went straight to the dead trees in the snow by the roadside and flew straight to the Guozhuang house. The David's deer, Huan Huan, slowed down and strolled forward slowly. The David's deer could smell the yuan qi on Zhang Xiaohua's body, so Zhang Xiaohua was not afraid that Huan Huan couldn't find her. Zhang Xiaohua's levitation technique was fast, and she moved forward in a straight line. Not long after, she could clearly see everything in the Guozhuang house with her divine sense. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't care less about observing the changes in the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Instead, she looked greedily at her own small courtyard. In the past 5 years, the small courtyard of the Zhang family had changed a lot. The original mud hut had been overturned and changed into a big bluestone house. The low mud wall had disappeared and was replaced by a very high bluestone wall. The low fence gate had also been replaced by the gate of a decent big family. At this time, there seemed to be no one in the small courtyard. There were several bluestone houses of the same size with the same gate. Zhang Kai, Mr. Lu Kai, and an old man who looked familiar to Zhang Xiaohua were anxiously talking about something. What surprised Zhang Xiaohua the most was that the east house of the courtyard was emitting a red light. Zhang Xiaohua's divine sense couldn't penetrate it. At this time, a person came out of the house. Wasn't it the girl she saved in Shizue Mountain, Li Yinfeng? She looked panicked and said something to the old man in the courtyard who Zhang Xiaohua was not familiar with. Then she hurried back to the house. The old man turned around and said something to Zhang Kai and others. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly remembered that this was Li Yinfeng's father, old shopkeeper Li. What? What's going on? What's in the room? What? Li Yinfeng. Old shopkeeper Li, why are they in my house? Zhang Xiaohua was completely confused. Looking at the dragon and phoenix yuan qi in the sky that couldn't be seen with the naked eye, Zhang Xiaohua forcefully circulated the qi in her body and sped up the levitation technique. A shadow appeared and Zhang Xiaohua flew towards the Guozhuang house. When Zhang Xiaohua was about to reach the Guozhuang house, she saw that there were too many villagers in the village and it was no longer suitable for levitation. Zhang Xiaohua twisted her body, made a hand seal, and drilled into the ground. She thought she would get lost, but once she went underground, she felt a strong yuan qi fluctuation in front of her. It seemed like she had a direction to guide her. Zhang Xiaohua activated the earth elemental escape and went there. When she got close, Zhang Xiaohua jumped out from the ground. When she looked up, she saw that it was the small courtyard where her father and Mr. Lu were. She was standing behind them. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were filled with tears. Finally, she didn't go in the wrong direction. At this time, Mr. Lu said, "Lu Kai, go out and see Xiaolong. Why isn't he back yet? It's just looking for a midwife. Why is it taking so long? I think Qian won't be able to hold on for much longer." When these words entered her ears, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly understood. So her little nephew was about to come into the world. At the same time, she released her divine sense. Seeing that the dragon and phoenix in the sky had stopped above her small courtyard, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be shocked. What kind of battle formation was this? Beside them, old shopkeeper Li comforted, "Brother Lu, don't worry. Sister-in-law Zhang and my wife are both inside. Although they aren't specialized midwives, they have a lot of experience. My wife has been vegetarian and praying to Buddha for the past few years. She has also helped a lot of people deliver babies for a living. There won't be too big of a problem." But Mr. Lu only started, but he couldn't finish his words. He could only look at Zhang Kai. Both of them smiled bitterly. That's right, your wife has helped a lot of people deliver babies, but they were all normal babies. The unborn baby in this house had stayed in his mother's stomach for 5 years. This morning, he suddenly had abdominal pain and knew it wasn't good. He could only ask Zhang Xiaolong to go out and look for a midwife. This situation naturally couldn't be directly told to old shopkeeper Li. Lu Kai listened to his father's orders and nodded. Father, don't worry. A mother relies on her son. Little sister will definitely be fine. I'll go out and take a look. Jin Feng is with Xiaolong, so there won't be too much of a delay. After saying this, he turned around and walked out of the small courtyard. But when he turned around, he saw Zhang Xiaohua, who had just walked behind them. He couldn't help calling out, Xiaolong, why are you alone? Where's the midwife? Xiaolong? When everyone heard this, they all turned around. Zhang Xiaohua had 3 brothers. Zhang Xiaolong's face was long and thin, while Zhang Xiaohu had a round face. When Zhang Xiaohua was young, she had a 60% resemblance to her second brother. As for Zhang Xiaohua, she was already very tall. Although her face was still the same as when she left home, her face was elongated. Therefore, with a single glance, she was 80% similar to Zhang Xiaolong, only she was a lot younger. Lu Kai and old shopkeeper Li first found it strange that Zhang Xiaohua came back alone without a midwife, so they looked behind him. Mr. Lu was also curious, but then he frowned. He was very confused, as if he already felt that this wasn't his usual son-in-law. But who was this strange young man? For a moment he was stunned. Only Zhang Kai turned around and knew that it wasn't Zhang Xiaolong. But he was also confused for a moment, then he was pleasantly surprised. His eyes couldn't hide the excitement as he anxiously took a step forward. Reaching out his hand, he trembled as he probed. Xiaohua? Are you Xiaohua? Even though Zhang Xiaohua had just experienced the trials of life and death, she still couldn't resist the affection of father and son in this world. She took a few steps forward and held Zhang Kai's trembling hand with both hands, saying, Father, it's me. I'm Xiaohua. I'm back. Hearing this, everyone's eyes in the courtyard lit up. Lu Kai and old shopkeeper Li's gaze also attracted from the still closed courtyard door to this young man who looked very similar to Zhang Xiaolong. Qijian Chinese website welcomes readers to read the latest, fastest, and hottest serial works at Qijian Originals. -3. Chapter 372. Zhang Kai's hands tightly grasped Zhang Xiaohua's hands. His right hand rubbed his eyes in disbelief, using the opportunity to wipe away some of the moisture in his eyes. He looked up and down at Zhang Xiaohua, smiling so widely that he couldn't close his mouth. He only said, Good, good. It's good that you're back. It's good that you're back. But then he turned his head and quietly wiped away his tears. He seemed to be very happy, but also seemed to have thought of something. Before Mr. Lu and Lu Kai could speak, old shopkeeper Li hurried forward from the side. He saluted and said, Xiaoxia Zhang, do you still remember this old man? Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly returned the salute and said, Uncle Li, please don't be so polite. You are Li Jinfeng's brother Li's father. You are my elder. I really can't accept your courtesy. Seeing Zhang Xiaohua respond so politely, Zhang Kai also pulled old shopkeeper Li's hand and said, Old brother, Xiaohua is only a child. You don't have to be so polite with him. Old shopkeeper Li repeatedly waved his hand and said, Old brother Zhang, I will never forget the favor of saving my life. Moreover, Xiaoxia Zhang saved the lives of our family of 3 in one go. He even almost lost his life because of it. Zhang Xiaohua was greatly embarrassed and said, Uncle Li, just call me Xiaohua. I really can't stand being called Xiaoxia Zhang. Mr. Lu also smiled at the side and said, Zhang Xiaohua, it's better to call you Xiaohua. Let the people of the Jianghu call you Xiaoxia Zhang. Hearing this, Zhang Xiaohua also hurried forward and saluted. Mr. Lu chuckled and helped him up. Then, Zhang Xiaohua and Lu Kai both saluted each other. Only then did they stand still. Just as they were about to speak, suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's nose smelled an extremely rich and light fragrance descending from the sky. At this moment, all the pores on his body didn't wait for him to circulate his energy. They all opened up and absorbed this extremely strange fragrance as if they were absorbing starlight at night. At this moment, the people in the courtyard seemed to have noticed something different. They looked at each other and twitched their noses, searching for the source of the fragrance. Only Zhang Xiaohua released his divine sense. He clearly saw that the dragon and phoenix Yuan Qi in the sky had already descended to the sky above the small house. The dragon and phoenix, formed by the Yuan Qi, seemed to be real, dancing in the sky. After a long while, the dragon and phoenix flew towards the sky above the small house from different directions and silently collided. The dragon and phoenix instantly disappeared and turned into countless petals that floated down. Heavenly maidens scattering petals. This phrase inexplicably flashed in Zhang Xiaohua's mind. As early as when Zhang Xiaohua used the oneness of heaven and man technique, he saw the majestic dragon and phoenix Yuan Qi in the starry sky. At this moment, it turned into a rain of petals and fell down, covering the entire sky above the Guozhuang house. Only a small part of the rain of petals seeped into the small house in the courtyard. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua released his divine sense with all his strength. Other than the Yuan Qi that directly fell into the small house, he didn't disturb it. Most of the scattered Yuan Qi were drawn into his small courtyard by him and absorbed with all his strength. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua was already in the 6th layer of the Qi refining realm. He could already control the Yuan Qi to the smallest detail. In addition to his powerful divine sense and the help of his Dantian's core, he absorbed all the scattered Yuan Qi outside the small house into his own meridians like a whale swallowing seawater. As for the Yuan Qi above the small house, Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to act rashly. Of course, he wouldn't compete with his little nephew. However, the small house was still covered by the red light that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. His divine sense couldn't know the use of the Yuan Qi. After a while, the scattered Yuan Qi of heaven and earth had become sparse. Suddenly, an inexplicable sound of music entered his mind, as if it was ringing in his heart. Zhang Xiaohua was about to use his divine sense to look when he heard a burst of exclamations in the small house. The red light that covered the small house immediately changed to a brilliant golden brilliance. Zhang Xiaohua frowned. When he was hesitating whether he should use his divine sense to look or not, he heard the door of the small house open. Li Yinfeng ran out with a pale face and whispered, oh no, Sister Qian. She gave birth to a monster." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned at first. Sister Qian, But then he was even more stunned. A monster. It wasn't just Zhang Xiaohua. Everyone in the courtyard was shocked. They all asked, what monster? A big lotus. Qian, gave birth to a big lotus. It's true, a big lotus. Everyone was dumbfounded. Lotus? Little Feng, are you seeing things? Lu Kai stepped forward and held Li Yinfeng's hand. He asked anxiously. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. These two were so intimate. Could it be? Sure enough, Li Yinfeng's hand trembled. She couldn't finish the sentence and said, It's true, husband. I really saw it. Mother and Auntie Guo were so scared that they couldn't move. That lotus, it could open and close as if it was blooming. At this time, Li Yinfeng also saw Zhang Xiaohua. She shouted, Xiaolong, why don't you go in and take a look? Zhang Xiaohua rubbed her nose. She was very embarrassed. Sister-in-law was giving birth. How could she dare to go in? Seeing this, Mr. Lu didn't have time to explain. He said to Li Yinfeng, Little Feng, you're brave. We can't go in. You should go in and take a look. Don't cause any big trouble. Li Yinfeng was a little puzzled. She looked at Zhang Xiaohua and nodded. Okay, father. She was about to go in. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua saw through her divine sense that the door of the small house was shining with a golden light. It was as if something was about to come out. Zhang Xiaohua didn't dare to be careless. She quickly took out the small sword and looked at the door nervously. Sure enough, when the golden light appeared in the small courtyard, Zhang Xiaohua saw her mother holding a big round ball and walking out. The ball was wrapped in a layer of flowing golden light. It was like flowing water that kept flowing. From time to time, it emitted a golden light that couldn't be seen by the naked eye. When Zhang Xiaohua looked with her eyes, she saw that the golden light was imitating the shape of a lotus flower. As the light radiated, it imitated the opening and closing of a lotus flower. At this time, Guo Sufei's face was pale. She bit her lips and her hands were trembling. Step by step, she slowly walked to the center of the small courtyard. Except for Zhang Xiaohua, who was still standing on the spot with the small sword in her hand, the others all took a few steps back in fear. Their faces were filled with nervousness and fear. Everyone's retreat naturally made Zhang Xiaohua stand out. Although Guo Sufei's eyes were blurred and frightened, when she saw Zhang Xiaohua, she was pleasantly surprised. She called out, "Xiaohua!" Although her voice was low, Zhang Xiaohua heard it clearly. She replied with tears in her eyes, "Mother, I'm back." Guo Sufei nodded, hinting her to step back a bit. But Zhang Xiaohua shook her head and said, "Mother, it's okay." Then she looked around and said, "Mother, put it on this stone table." Guo Sufei still shook her head, but her eyes were looking at the door of the small courtyard. How could Zhang Xiaohua not know her mother's intention? She walked straight over and said, "Mother, it's okay. Let me see." How could Guo Sufei let her get close? She took a few steps back and said with a trembling voice, "Xiaohua, you stay away, stay away." Zhang Xiaohua stopped and said, "Mother, you've forgotten. That year, I was the one who saw that eldest sister-in-law was pregnant." Guo Sufei was stunned. Zhang Xiaohua continued, "Give this to me. I'll see what's going on." Guo Sufei asked, "Is it really okay?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "It's okay. Mother, it's just my nephew or niece. What's there to be afraid of?" After saying that, she took a few steps forward and took the lotus from Guo Sufei's hand. Seeing this, Guo Sufei could only comply, but she still followed behind Zhang Xiaohua, feeling extremely worried. The lotus that the ball turned into was very similar. It also felt like a lotus in her hand. Zhang Xiaohua walked to the side of the stone table and placed the lotus on it. She looked at it with her eyes. It was just like a real lotus. She couldn't see any abnormalities. It was just that the lotus kept opening and closing, which made people feel strange. Zhang Xiaohua immediately released her divine sense and carefully observed the ball. As soon as she released her divine sense, Zhang Xiaohua was shocked. What kind of ball was this? This was clearly a mysterious array formed by countless golden talismans that looked like tadpoles. Those countless golden talismans seemed to be alive. They were colluding together and constantly rotating in the air like flowing water. When Zhang Xiaohua immersed her divine sense into one of the tadpole-like talismans, she was shocked to find that this talisman was also formed by countless talismans. Those tiny talismans were also like tadpoles intertwined together. This, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't help but be tongue-tied. This was far beyond her imagination. It was far beyond the array and prohibition that she knew. She could only vaguely feel that the entire ball array seemed to have existed since the beginning. It was not something that could be formed by human strength. It was also not something that could be broken by human strength. As for those tiny talismans, Zhang Xiaohua simply used his divine sense to know that the intricate structure of the talismans was millions of times more powerful than the array formation that she had obtained from Fire Dragon Immortal on the deserted island. Yes, perhaps even more. But this difference was not something that Zhang Xiaohua could understand. What should I do? The child is probably in this array. If I can't break this array, the child will not be able to come out. But this array, I think no one in the world can break it. What is going on? Sister-in-law only drank the spring water that was rich in vitality. I only gave her a small vitality stone. How could it give birth to such a strange thing? Moreover, it is protected by this innate array. That's right, the dragon and phoenix bringing prosperity in the morning, and the heavenly maiden scattering flowers just now, and even the sound of a musical instrument, they were all for this child, right? But since there was a natural phenomenon, the vine should have fallen when the melon ripened, and the vine should have fallen when the time was ripe. Thinking about this, Zhang Xiaohua turned to look at her mother, who was standing beside her. Guo Sufei's expression seemed to have calmed down. Perhaps it was because she saw another son, or perhaps it was because she believed in her son's ability. When the others saw this, they all took a few steps forward, other than Zhang Kai and Mr. Liu, who stood beside Zhang Xiaohua. The others still kept a distance. Zhang Xiaohua sighed. Just as she was about to tell her mother, the golden array happened to turn in a direction. Zhang Xiaohua inadvertently looked at it with her divine sense and could not help but be happy. There are many stories that have yet to be told. The interest of the faction is paramount. This is the rule of survival for every faction in the Jianghu. If there is a faction that selflessly helps the Misty School, that would be strange. -3. Chapter 373. In her divine sense, there was a narrow slit in the flawless, perfectly round and seamless array formed by golden tadpole-like talismans. A strange fragrance came out from that narrow slit. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. Her divine sense immediately probed into the slit. Only then did she discover that the array was only a thin layer, but inside this thin space there were hundreds of millions of arrays made up of countless tadpole-like talismans. That array was actually made up of hundreds of millions of layers of arrays. However, Zhang Xiaohua was deeply aware that this array was definitely not as simple as adding one layer after another. Inside the spherical array, there was dense purple qi, and inside the purple qi was a chubby male baby. His eyes and mouth were tightly closed, and he had a solemn look. Zhang Xiaohua didn't have time to think about other things for the time being. She first raised her head and said to Guo Sufei with a smile, "Mother, congratulations, it's a boy. But wait a moment, I'll see how to get him out." Guo Sufei was overjoyed. The fear in her eyes disappeared and was replaced by a look of ecstasy. The people around were also happy and wanted to look forward. Zhang Xiaohua waved her hand and said, "Mother, you and Father should all step back. I don't want any accidents to happen. I want to take a careful look first and think of a good idea." Guo Sufei quickly nodded and stepped back with the others, keeping a certain distance. When the others were far away, Zhang Xiaohua carefully looked at the mysterious innate array again. The slit of the sphere seemed to be natural, and the tadpole-like talismans beside the slit seemed to have no connection at all. However, Zhang Xiaohua knew that the slit was definitely not there originally. The original array must be perfectly round without any slit, and the slit must be the inevitable result of the array's operation to a certain stage. Zhang Xiaohua touched her chin with her hand and pondered. She thought that her little nephew was definitely not born at full term. Looking at the size of the slit, it was much earlier. If he was born at full term, he would definitely be in human form, and not a fetus protected by the array. Alas, it had been 5 years, and it was just a small slit. If he was born at full term, who knew how many years it would take? Fortunately, there was a little clue and a direction to break through. So Zhang Xiaohua carefully observed the tadpoles on both sides of the slit. The flowing tadpoles seemed to show signs of separation, but there was a faintly discernible force that firmly bound them together. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. She continued to look in the direction of the slit. As expected, in the ray of the sphere along the slit, the energy of the array was obviously weaker than the surrounding energy. Zhang Xiaohua naturally understood that this was where the array would be divided into 2 halves. Only by starting from here could the array be divided into 2 halves. However, did Zhang Xiaohua have the ability to do so? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua tightened his grip on the small sword. He knew that, at this moment, only his small sword could help him. However, it was hard to say if it would be effective. After all, he had only used the small sword to break through ordinary restrictions and arrays, such as the small box that contained the Carefree Heart Sutra and a cave that was sealed by fire dragon Venerable. However, he had no confidence in breaking through this array. Zhang Xiaohua held the small sword with his left hand and wanted to take out the vitality stones from his pocket. However, he laughed bitterly in his heart. Previously, when he used the small sword with his left hand, the energy used by the small sword did not seem to be the vital energy in his meridians. Even if he took out the crouching ox stone from his money bag, it would probably be useless. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua hesitated. However, just in case, Zhang Xiaohua still took out a piece and placed it in his hand. Then he used his divine sense to lock onto the slit and raised the small sword in his hand slightly. At this moment, he heard Guo Sufei's surprised voice. "Xiaohua, what are you doing?" Zhang Xiaohua could only turn around and explain, "Mother, the child is in this sphere. I have to cut it open." "Sphere? Isn't this a big lotus flower?" "Oh yes, Mother. You have to cut open the lotus seed pod of this lotus flower." "But Xiaohua, you won't hurt the child inside, right?" "Yes." Guo Sufei had not seen her little grandson yet. How could she let Zhang Xiaohua use this small dagger-like thing to harm her little grandson? Even the lotus flower outside would not be able to do so. Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, "Don't worry, Mother. I definitely won't. I'm confident. That's for sure. There won't be any problems. I don't know what the dense purple chi in the sphere array is, but it seems to have some incredible vitality. As long as I have the protection of the purple chi, I won't be hurt by the sphere array. How can I hurt the child inside?" Zhang Xiaohua thought to himself. Then all right. However, Xiaohua, you must be careful. You must not hurt the child. Especially the child's penis. What? Zhang Xiaohua almost fell over. However, it was understandable. Things that could carry on the family line were naturally very precious. Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath and slowly raised her left hand again. At this time another person spoke. It was Zhang Kai. He said, "Xiaohua." "Ah, what's wrong, father?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. "That you must be careful. Especially the last thing your mother said just now." Zhang Xiaohua was speechless. She smiled and said, "I know, father. I know what to do." Then he looked around again. Everyone looked at each other and quietly waited for instructions. When no one spoke, he said, "Then I'll start." Zhang Xiaohua turned around again. She stretched out her left hand and raised the small sword. She used her divine sense to firmly lock onto the crack on the round ball. When the crack rotated to the top, Zhang Xiaohua took a deep breath. Her left hand moved like lightning and directly cut towards the bottom of the crack. Sure enough, as Zhang Xiaohua used the sword in her left hand, an inexplicable heat flow appeared somewhere on her left arm. It flowed along the small sword's arm and along the small sword's arm. When the small sword pierced into the crack, the heat flow also reached the small sword in time. There was no strong reaction, nor was there any glaring brilliance. When the small sword and the tadpole talisman came in contact, it immediately produced an incomparably huge suction force. It sucked away all the heat flow on Zhang Xiaohua's left arm. At the same time, the tadpoles that had absorbed the energy seemed to have eaten something full. They swam to the sides, and the crack naturally stretched down a little. Zhang Xiaohua was overjoyed. However, this nameless heat flow was not controlled by him, so he could not activate it. Fortunately, the heat flow in his left arm did not. Instead, it was produced from somewhere and continued to travel up his arm. Therefore, as the heat flow in his left arm continued to enter, the crack also became longer and longer. If there was enough heat flow in Zhang Xiaohua's body, the crack would be completely pulled open sooner or later. Unfortunately, even Zhang Xiaohua himself did not know how much heat flow there was. He could only slowly pray in his heart. Unfortunately, the heavens had always been against people's wishes. Not long after, Zhang Xiaohua felt that the heat flow in his left arm was much smaller. He knew that things were not good. He hurriedly absorbed the vitality from the vitality stone in his right hand. However, when the vitality entered his body, It only filled his meridians and did not change the intensity of the heat flow in the slightest. What should I do now? The crack on the round ball formation is not big enough. I can't reach out and carry the child out. Just as he was thinking, there was no more heat flow in his left arm. The small sword could no longer cut it. However, at this moment, something abnormal happened. The purple gas in the round ball formation seemed to be attracted by something. It flowed along the tip of the small sword into Zhang Xiaohua's left arm. It also formed a warm flow. It followed another path up his left arm until it disappeared. After a moment, another warm flow was produced. It flowed from the original path to the small sword. The tadpole-like talisman was expelled by this warm flow. It was like boiling water pouring on snow, separating into two sides. Zhang Xiaohua was ecstatic. There was a lot of purple gas in the round ball. It had already formed a cycle with the warm flow in his left arm. Presumably, it would not be long before the crack was large enough. While cutting open the formation effortlessly, Zhang Xiaohua pondered. The purple gas must be the key to breaking the formation. However, to directly use the purple gas to break the formation, it would take a long time. This period of time might be the time when the baby was gestating in his sister-in-law's body. Now that the baby was born prematurely with the purple gas alone, it might be possible to break the formation in a few decades. However, it was not in his sister-in-law's body. It was unknown whether it would harm the baby's growth. Now, the purple gas could be used to break the formation in a short period of time. It must be a special method. Again, she did not know whether it would harm the baby's growth. However, since things had come to this point, this was the only way. It was inconceivable to let the round formation of the lotus stay in the Zhang family's small courtyard in the Guozhuang house for several decades. After the time it took to drink a cup of tea, the crack was large enough. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to withdraw the small sword and carry her little nephew out of the formation. However, the formation seemed to have a strong suction force. No matter how hard Zhang Xiaohua tried, she could not pull it out at all. Left with no choice, Zhang Xiaohua could only continue to absorb the purple gas and use the warm flow to break open the round ball. In the eyes of Zhang Kai, Guosufei, and the rest, Zhang Xiaohua's inconspicuous small sword pierced into the lotus. The lotus stopped opening and closing and bloomed little by little. Everyone held their breaths and watched carefully, afraid that they would disturb Zhang Xiaohua's actions. As Zhang Xiaohua's small sword broke the formation, the lotus bloomed more and more. After the time it took to eat a meal, the entire round ball was split into two. In everyone's eyes, the lotus bloomed completely. In an instant, the entire small courtyard was filled with a strange fragrance. At this moment, the baby in the purple gas suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were looking straight into Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. When their eyes met, Zhang Xiaohua instantly felt like she was being sucked into darkness. -3. Chapter 374. It was just absolute darkness. Not only was he unable to see, even his heart was a ball of darkness. However, in this place where there was no light, Zhang Xiaohua felt very safe. It was as if the surrounding darkness was filled with an extremely familiar, yet absolutely unfamiliar existence. Zhang Xiaohua thought carefully. Wasn't this existence the heavenly Tao that he had sensed when he was in the state of the union of heaven and man in Songning Town and outside Pingyang City? Zhang Xiaohua wanted to move his hand, but he did not have any intuition. Zhang Xiaohua wanted to blink, but he did not have any intuition either. It was as if he was just a consciousness without any form. After an unknown period of time, an instant, perhaps 10,000 years, or even longer, Zhang Xiaohua did not seem to have any sense of time. At a point extremely far away or extremely near, there was a sudden change. First, it vibrated continuously, emitting a mysterious wave that instantly spread throughout the entire space. That point turned from endless darkness to transparency, then red, orange, yellow, green, cyan blue, all the way to purple. Every color evolved into a wave that spread throughout the entire space. Finally, the purple wave lasted for the longest time, and the wave was also the most intense. The entire space was actually filled with the same dense purple qi as the spherical array formation. Zhang Xiaohua was greatly shocked. What was going on? Why did he see something? Then, an even more puzzling change appeared. After the purple color passed, the entire space stopped vibrating. There was only silence for a moment. All the colors that were mentioned just now appeared at that point, and the entire space was filled with the 7 types of fluctuations. At this moment, that point suddenly lit up, and a ray of white light flashed from there. In an instant, the white light filled the entire space, and the chaotic fluctuations in the space changed into a more mysterious vibration at the same time. The sudden appearance of the light made Zhang Xiaohua a little dizzy. He subconsciously wanted to cover it with his hand, but before his feeling could reach his arm, there was a complete change at that point. That invisible point suddenly collapsed, and then, like an explosion, it expanded infinitely in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it exceeded Zhang Xiaohua's perception. The space that was just a single material was immediately filled with light and other inexplicable things. Where did this light come from? Zhang Xiaohua thought to herself. This state of chaos did not last for long. The heavenly Tao that Zhang Xiaohua was familiar with filled the entire space. In the blink of an eye, the space evolved into earth, fire, wind, and thunder. Endless matter and countless miracles were completed in an instant before Zhang Xiaohua's eyes. Following that, countless planets appeared. Each planet emitted boundless starlight. On these planets, life appeared. Some of these life forms lived in a daze, while others had the ability to move mountains and fill seas. Zhang Xiaohua was dumbfounded, completely dumbfounded. Even with his cultivation level of the 6th layer, he couldn't understand what was happening in front of him. What on earth was this? With his limited knowledge, he could only make a hazy guess. Was this life? However, he immediately thought of something. What was death? In the instant that he thought about it, the things in the space seemed to have passed through countless years. The fluctuations of the entire space slowly became chaotic. Countless planets shrank and collapsed, and then the entire space collapsed. After that, this collapse slowly shrank again, as if it was the reverse of the explosion and expansion just now. It shrank again into a small point, and the light also returned to this point. 7 colors flashed, and then it returned to endless darkness. Was this death? Zhang Xiaohua thought. However, before he could think further, his eyes lit up. The scene in front of him changed, and he returned to the small courtyard of the Guozhuang house. In front of him was still that newborn baby, whose bright eyes were staring at Zhang Xiaohua. At this moment, Zhang Xiaohua felt that his spiritual sense could move freely again. He unconsciously released it, and it enveloped the entire stone table. On the stone table, the formation that had already been cut in half was closing up at a speed visible to his spiritual sense. As it closed up, the dense purple qi in the original sphere was also divided into 2 halves, each of which enveloped the baby. The faint purple qi that covered the baby's body also seemed to seep in, shrinking into the baby's skin. Zhang Xiaohua roughly scanned the baby's body with a spiritual sense. He couldn't help but be shocked again. There were actually countless meridians in the baby's body, all of which were absorbing the purple qi outside the body. The meridians that he cultivated from the Carefree Heart Sutra were shockingly among them. At this moment, no matter how stupid Zhang Xiaohua was, he knew that a great opportunity was in front of him. He didn't dare to be careless, and immediately scanned the baby's body with his spiritual sense. At this moment, the baby's body also seemed to be transparent, as if there was no obstruction that blocked his spiritual sense. Zhang Xiaohua frantically memorized. In just a few breaths of time, the thin purple qi on the baby's body was completely absorbed. In an instant, the baby's meridians flickered a few times before disappearing. No matter how Zhang Xiaohua scanned, he found nothing. However, a faint smile appeared on Zhang Xiaohua's lips. Just as Zhang Xiaohua was about to withdraw his spiritual sense, the two halves of the formation on the stone table had already closed up, forming two spheres of the same size that emitted a golden brilliance. Just like the complete spherical formation from before, countless tadpole-like glyphs flowed with brilliant light. Just as Zhang Xiaohua's spiritual sense focused on the two spheres, the spheres seemed to sense something and suddenly flew up from the stone table, flying towards Zhang Xiaohua's forehead. However, just as they flew halfway, one of the spheres suddenly changed direction. With a turn, it directly entered the baby's forehead on the stone table. The remaining sphere didn't change at all. When it approached Zhang Xiaohua's forehead, it turned into a ray of golden light and shot into it. The golden light entered Zhang Xiaohua's forehead and went straight into the Naiwen Palace of the Upper Dantian. In the Naiwen Palace, the essence of elixir that Zhang Xiaohua had painstakingly cultivated was slowly rotating. The golden light rotated in the Naiwen Palace and immediately covered the essence of elixir with a layer of golden light. However, the golden light didn't stay in the Naiwen Palace for long. After leaving the Naiwen Palace, it went straight to a mysterious place behind the head. Once it entered, there was no more sound. It wasn't the first time Zhang Xiaohua sensed that mysterious place. Back when he was on the deserted island, when the refining elixir heart with jade blood technique reached its end, Zhang Xiaohua's Naiwen Palace was about to be scorched by the internal fire. However, after the golden light entered, Zhang Xiaohua couldn't find any trace of it. Zhang Xiaohua sensed that the golden light entered a mysterious place behind the head and was very surprised. Before he could think about it, the baby on the stone table changed again. The golden light entered the Naiwen Palace between the eyebrows. In an instant, the baby's body shone with golden light and a golden shadow stood up from the baby's body. It looked like an adult. The adult baby pointed one hand to the sky and the other to the ground. There was a benevolent smile on the corner of his mouth. Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. What did this mean? When the shadow finished laughing, it first expanded and then rapidly shrank. It also entered the Naiwen Palace between the eyebrows and disappeared. At this time, the baby in Zhang Xiaohua's mind didn't have any abnormalities. It was the same as any ordinary person that he saw on a daily basis. There wasn't even the slightest fluctuation of the qi of heaven and earth. However, Zhang Xiaohua stood there in a daze. His mind didn't dare to relax for a moment. Today's encounter was really too magical. Everything was unimaginable. Perhaps in the next moment, there would be a miracle that had never been seen before. Even if, now, this baby who was still sleeping soundly with his eyes closed immediately grew up and called him uncle with a smile, or could immediately fly into the sky, he would believe it without hesitation. However, at this moment, Zhang Xiaohua suddenly felt that someone was pulling his sleeve. Could it be the hand of Tian Dao? He felt a sweep of his divine sense. How was it the heavenly Tao? It was just his mother, carefully tugging at him. Zhang Xiaohua hurriedly retracted his mind and asked, "Mother, what's the matter?" Guo Sufei was ecstatic and asked with a trembling voice, "Xiaohua, that is the child well? Can I hold him? This way. I don't want my good grandson to freeze. After all, it's still winter. This child who has just been born can't be frozen at all." Zhang Xiaohua was startled and turned his head to look. Of course, there was nothing on the stone table. There was only a white and fat, naked baby sleeping soundly with his eyes closed. It made people feel pain and pity for him. Zhang Xiaohua thought to himself, "Mother, don't worry. Even if I freeze, your good grandson won't have the slightest problem." However, he still didn't feel at ease and asked, "Mother, what did you see just now?" "What did I see?" Guo Sufei was startled and immediately said proudly, "Xiaohua, you've really grown up. Where did you learn the sword? It's so powerful that you could split the lotus with just one strike. It's really much more powerful than Lu's butcher's knife. And you just stood there without moving after splitting the lotus. We didn't dare to disturb you, but isn't the child still young? He can't catch a cold. Look, can I carry him back to the house?" From what his mother said, From the time he split the lotus to her pulling his sleeve, it was only a very short period of time. However, in this very short period of time, he encountered something that others would never be able to understand in their entire lives. Zhang Xiaohua looked at the small sword in his left hand and smiled bitterly. He put it in his arms and said, "Of course you can. Mother, quickly carry the child back to the house." When Guo Sufei heard this, she was overjoyed. She hurried forward and carefully held the baby in her arms. However, the moment the baby touched Guo Sufei, he immediately opened his mouth and cried loudly. The cry was very loud and clear, echoing throughout the small courtyard. At this moment, a surprised voice sounded. "Ah, mother, the child has been born? Is Qian okay?" Zhang Xiaohua turned around and saw that the door of the small courtyard had just been pushed open. A young man who was as tall as him was running towards the direction of the crying baby with a face full of surprise. That young and thin face looked 80% similar to Zhang Xiaohua's. Wasn't he Zhang Xiaohua's eldest brother, Zhang Xiaolong? Behind Zhang Xiaolong was an old woman with a depressed face. There was no need to look. Just by looking at her, one could tell that this was a midwife who didn't make it in time. -3. Chapter 375. Hearing the child's cries, Zhang Xiaolong rushed into the small courtyard. Ignoring the people in the courtyard, he ran straight to his mother's side and looked at his child with concern. When he saw the child, he couldn't help but frown and ask, "Mother, why didn't you wrap the child in a quilt when you took him out? It's so cold. Won't the child freeze?" Guo Sufei smiled bitterly and was about to say something when the depressed midwife who had rushed over from behind revealed a happy expression. She said in an exaggerated tone, "Io, look at you. You don't have any experience at all. In such a cold day, you actually carried the child out without a blanket. Based on my experience, this child will definitely be in constant pain in the future. Quick, give it to me and let me see." Hearing this, Zhang Xiaolong's face was also full of worry. He wanted to say something, but when he looked at his mother, he swallowed his words back. The midwife walked forward and was about to take the baby. Just as she reached out, she immediately retracted her hand in shock and shouted, "Oh, why is this baby like this?" Zhang Xiaolong was stunned. He carefully looked at the child in front of him, but he couldn't see any abnormalities. Zhang Xiaohua was also puzzled. Could it be that the midwife could see some clues? But at this moment, even her divine sense couldn't detect any abnormalities. In the end, the midwife said in fear, "I've delivered babies my whole life. Newborn babies are all wrinkled, like little old men. They're extremely ugly. It's only after they're a month old that they'll slowly grow white and plump. They're completely unlike your baby, who was born so beautiful. She's an evildoer, an evildoer." After saying that, she didn't even have time to say the reason she wanted to stay. She quickly turned around and ran away, leaving only Zhang Xiaolong behind. He opened his mouth and said this, "Granny Li, you haven't received the money." But seeing the speed at which the old granny ran out of the small courtyard, he muttered to himself, "This old granny actually ran so fast." So it turns out that she was dawdling at home, taking a dump and peeing, and only saying that she couldn't walk. It was just to get more money for me. At this time, another figure that Zhang Xiaohua was very familiar with limped into the small courtyard. Wasn't that young master Li Jinfeng? Li Jinfeng shouted, "Xiaolong, what's going on?" "Granny, Li had brought the child out so quickly? Even so, you should at least leave some food for him. Wouldn't it be extremely rude to just let him go like this?" At this moment, Zhang Xiaolong had no time to explain to him. He hurriedly said to Guo Sufei, "Mother, quickly carry the child into the house. It's warm inside." Guo Sufei seemed to wake up from a dream. She quickly ran into the house with the baby in her arms. At this time, Zhang Xiaohua's face was a little gloomy. She reached out and took out the small sword. She frowned and thought for a while. Then she slowly put it back into her clothes. She seemed to have made her own decision. Other people in the small courtyard, such as Zhang Kai and Mr. Liu, looked at what was happening in front of them as if they were watching a play. They had no chance to interrupt. When Guasufei carried the child into the house, they also seemed to wake up from a dream. Zhang Kai asked, Xiaolong, what's going on now? Why did you take so long to invite Granny Li over? When Zhang Xiaolong saw his father blaming him, he helplessly replied, Father, when my own child was born, how could I not be anxious? Young Master Li and I had already arrived at Granny Li's house, but this old thing just kept dawdling. One moment she said her stomach hurt, the next moment she said her feet hurt. I gave her more money, but she still said we were all from the neighboring village, so I didn't need to be polite. I didn't know what she meant until I accidentally said the wrong amount of money, saying it was 3 coins. Li Jinfeng next to him also laughed. Uncle Zhang, don't blame Xiaolong. You see, when I fell from the donkey, Xiaolong didn't even bother to help me. He only pulled Granny Li and hurried on. Zhang Xiaolong asked apologetically, Young Master Li, I'm really sorry. How are your injuries? Li Jinfeng waved his hand and said, It's fine. No matter what, I'm still a rider. This is just a small accident. Zhang Kai wanted to speak again, but Mr. Lu next to him laughed and said, It's really a lucky hit. Old brother Zhang, Xiaolong's delay is really wonderful. If that Granny Li came in time, even if Xiaohua came back in time, the strange phenomenon just now would be known by outsiders. Maybe, and that's for sure. This Granny Li will definitely spread the news of the strange phenomenon just now. If this was known by outsiders, this child's life will be in big trouble. Everyone in the small courtyard suddenly understood. Only Zhang Xiaolong and Li Jinfeng were confused, asking, Strange phenomenon? What strange phenomenon? Immediately, Zhang Xiaolong's eyes widened, asking loudly, Xiaohua? Father said Xiaohua came back? Xiaohua came back. Where is he? Because of Granny Li's disturbance, Zhang Kai and the others forgot to tell him that Zhang Xiaohua came back. Hearing his big brother's question, Zhang Xiaohua came out from behind Lu Kai, smiling and saying, Big brother, I'm here. Looking at this younger brother, who suddenly came out from behind Lu Kai, facing a faint smile, his height is the same as his, and his face is very similar to his own. Zhang Xiaolong's eyes were moist. There was an indescribable feeling in his heart. As the saying goes, an elder brother is like a father. It's exactly this kind of feeling. Zhang Xiaolong took a few steps forward, stretching out his long arms, and hugged Zhang Xiaohua tightly in his arms, just like when he hugged him when he was young. Zhang Xiaohua's eyes were also a bit hazy. Yes, father and big brother miss me. When father saw me, he only had scruples about his dignity, so he could only hold my hand and look at me carefully. He rarely hugs me in his arms. Big brother is the best. Just like when he brought me up, he didn't hide his feelings. After hugging for a while, Zhang Xiaolong patted his younger brother's back and let him go. He looked up and down again, smiling. Xiaohua has also grown up. You're actually as tall as me. Zhang Xiaohua also smiled and said, Big brother, I'm a little taller than you. Then he walked in front of Li Jinfeng, cupped his hands and said, Young Master Li, I trust you've been well since we last met. Li Jinfeng was even more excited. He quickly saluted and said, I've been well. I'm indebted to. Before he could finish, Zhang Xiaohua smiled and said, Young Master Li is my first teacher. There's no need to be so polite. Li Jinfeng was also an open-minded person. He smiled and said, Great kindness can't be thanked with words. I'll thank you once today. I won't thank you again in the future. Finished speaking, he deeply saluted. Zhang Xiaohua also quickly returned the salute. Li Jinfeng got up and patted Zhang Xiaohua's shoulder. He said with a smile, In the past, I was able to touch your head. After not seeing you for a few years, I can only pat your shoulder. AI, time is like water. There's no turning back. Good. She didn't know what kind of emotions this guy was feeling. Sad one moment and admiring the next. Zhang Xiaohua looked at Li Jinfeng, who was already a little shorter than her, and sighed in her heart. Back then, they had met by chance in the carriage. She never thought that the situation would be like this today. Meeting by chance could be very strange. At this moment, Li Yinfeng, who had been staring at Zhang Xiaohua, walked up with Lu Kai. When Zhang Xiaohua saw her coming, she quickly waved her hand and said, "Big Sister Li, oh, I should call you sister-in-law, but please don't salute me anymore. Uncle Li and Brother Li have already thanked me just now. If you come over and thank me again later, I'll really blush." When Li Yinfeng heard this, her face turned a little red. Just as she was about to speak, Zhang Xiaohua interrupted and said, "Moreover, sister-in-law, who asked my character to be so good? The heavens have seen that I've worked hard to save people and have repaid me handsomely. You don't have to be so courteous anymore." Hearing Zhang Xiaohua calling her sister-in-law, Li Yinfeng's face had already turned red, until Zhang Xiaohua nagged for a long time and stopped when her mouth was dry. She then said, "Zhang Xiaohua, I'm not thanking you this time." "Ah." Zhang Xiaohua was stunned. "You should have said so earlier. Sigh, you've been too evasive for so long. You've hurt my reputation." Zhang Xiaohua's face was a little hot. Li Yinfeng looked at Lu Kai's expression and asked, "Seeing that you're back, I'm finally relieved. But do you know where Xiaohu is?" "I heard from Big Brother that the Misty School had been destroyed and the Misty School outside Pingyang City had been taken over by another sect. But why hasn't there been any news from Xiaohu? Is he alive or—" She couldn't finish the last word. "Xiaohu?" Zhang Xiaohua was stunned, but she immediately understood a little. Looking at Lu Kai's awkward expression, she understood everything. She secretly laughed in her heart and also felt a little sad. She could only sigh and said, "Sister-in-law, I've also just returned and haven't returned to Ethereal Heights for 4 to 5 years. I really don't know the details of the Misty School. Although I went to Huanxi Heights a few days ago, I didn't get any useful news." Hearing this, everyone was stunned. Zhang Kai asked nervously, "Xiaohua, why did you go to Huanxi Heights for no reason? Are you looking for trouble? If that sect saw you, do you still want your life?" Zhang Xiaohua was also stunned. The Righteous Alliance didn't know that she had killed their disciple. Why would they find trouble with her? But immediately, she understood that her father had misunderstood. She smiled and said, "Father, don't worry. I'm also not a disciple of the Misty School. Even if I went to Ethereal Heights openly, no one would recognize me. Moreover, I'm only going to Huanxi Heights, and it has nothing to do with the Misty School." "Oh, I see." Zhang Kai seemed to understand and said, "Then you have to be careful and don't run around for no reason." At this moment, a trembling and shy voice sounded. "That Xiaohua! Did you see Qiu Tong?" "Ah." Zhang Xiaohua looked over in surprise. Of course, Li Jinfeng's pale face was slightly red, and he was looking at her with his dry lips. -3. Chapter 376. Li Jinfeng had only seen Qiu Tong once at the Lotus Escort Agency. It had been more than 5 years. Could it be that he still could not forget her? Zhang Xiaohua was really not sure. Was this the legendary love at first sight? Suddenly, Zhang Xiaohua's heart skipped a beat. Could it be that young Master Li is still unmarried? However, he wasn't foolish enough to ask in front of his face right now. He only smiled and said, "Big Brother is really an infatuated person. However, I don't know if you'll be happy or unhappy to hear this news." Li Jinfeng frowned and said, "Xiaohua, regardless of whether Qiu Tong is dead or alive, you have to tell me honestly. I think I am fully prepared." Zhang Xiaohua said, "Brother Li, why are you cursing Sister Qiu Tong so much? Look at my smile. Can I tell you the bad news?" Then you mean you saw Miss Qiu Tong at Huanxi Manor?" Li Jinfeng was a little ecstatic. Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Big Brother, calm down, calm down. You have to pay attention to your image. I only received news of Sister Qiu Tong at Huanxi Manor. I did not see her." "Is that so?" Li Jinfeng was obviously a little disappointed. However, his eyes lit up again. He said, "It's good that you have news. It's good that you have news. How is she now? Where is she now? Chi." He seemed to have some questions that he was too embarrassed to ask. Zhang Xiaohua said, Sister Chiotong is said to be fine. Her life is not in danger. However, she is not in Pingyang City. I don't know where she is, and I don't know the details. And I knew it. Li Jinfeng's face lit up. He said, "She is only the manager of Huanxi Manor. She has nothing to do with the Misty School. How could she be in trouble for no reason?" Looking at Li Jinfeng's reaction, old shopkeeper Li, who was standing a little far away, secretly sighed. His eyes turned away, as if he expected better from Li Jinfeng. "That's right. Brother Zhang already has a grandson. What about me?" He didn't even know where his daughter-in-law was. "If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have let this brat go to Pingyang City back then. I should have found him a child bride earlier." That was what old Li thought. Li Yinfeng didn't get any definite news about Zhang Xiaohu, so she still looked a little sad. Lu Kai walked up to her and reached out to hold her hand. Li Yinfeng turned her head and saw the concern in Lu Kai's eyes. She held Lu Kai's hand and nodded. Seeing that everyone was done with their questions, Zhang Xiaolong asked another question. "Xiaohua, where have you been all these years? Why didn't you send a message back?" "Father and mother were worried to death. They thought you." Zhang Xiaohua smiled bitterly and said, "Big brother, it's not that I didn't want to send a message. It's that no one could send a message to me." Zhang Xiaolong was stunned and said, "You were caught and sent to jail." Zhang Xiaohua rolled her eyes and said, "Big brother, do I have to go to that extent? It's a long story." Zhang Xiaohua was about to explain when Zhang Kai said, "All right, Xiaohua, let's not talk about it. You must be tired from the journey. Go back to your room and rest. Also, Mr. Lu, brotherly, we can't keep standing in this courtyard. Anyway, the child has been safely born. We're all relieved. Let the women be busy. Let's go back to the room and have some tea." Everyone nodded in agreement. Therefore, other than Zhang Xiaolong and Li Yinfeng who entered the room, everyone else followed Zhang Kai out of the small courtyard and prepared to go back to the original Zhang family's small courtyard. Just as they left the small courtyard, they found that it was unusually lively outside the courtyard door. Why do you think? A group of 7 or 8-year-old children in the Guozhuang house surrounded something that looked very similar to a mule. They were laughing and playing. A few bold ones held a piece of grass in their hands and waved it in front of the mule, trying to lure it. However, the mule just lowered its head and didn't look at them. The grass was even more disdainful. The children didn't see the arrogance in the mule's eyes. They only regretted that their tried and tested method had failed. The timid children stayed far away and only looked at it enviously. Sometimes they were narrow-minded and even threw 1 or 2 small stones to tease it. In the distance, there were a few idle people in the village who looked at it from time to time. They seemed to have their own plans. Wasn't this mule Zhang Xiaohua's odd beast mount, Huan Huan? This spirit beast really had a good nose. It smelled the entire way and found its way to the door. When he saw the strange thing in front of his door, Zhang Kai was also stunned. He looked at it in a fluster. Mr. Lu was first stunned, then confused. After that, he separated the group of urchins and looked at it from head to toe. He repeatedly exclaimed in surprise, "Could this be the David's David that was written in the book?" He smacked his lips a few times and raised his head to ask, "Whose family's mule is this?" Zhang Xiaohua smiled from behind and said, "Mr. Lu, this is my mount." Seeing this, Mr. Lu slapped his forehead and said with a smile, "I'm going to faint. When I saw this strange thing, I forgot about you. Our Guozhuang house has always had very few people coming. Today, other than you, there shouldn't be any outsiders. Naturally, I thought of you first. That's right, is this animal an odd beast?" Just as he finished speaking, Huan Huan didn't agree. It hissed and bit Mr. Lu's clothes with its mouth. Mr. Lu was startled. Zhang Xiaohua patted Huan Huan's head and said with a smile, "Mr. Lu, it's an odd beast. I call it Huan Huan. Don't be fooled by its appearance. It's clear in its heart that if you call it Huan Huan, it'll definitely be happy." Mr. Lu was even more surprised. Like a child, he called out in a low voice, "Huan Huan, Huan Huan, Huan seemed to understand and hissed again. However, its head was raised high. Mr. Lu clapped his hands in wonder. Zhang Xiaohua led Huan and followed the crowd back to the Zhang family's small courtyard. She took the long sword from Huan's back and gently placed it by the wall of the small courtyard. Then she also led Huan to the corner of the courtyard and let it do as it pleased. Zhang Xiaohua originally wanted to accompany her father. However, she was chased to the side room by Zhang Kai. She said that she was travel-worn and should rest more. However, Zhang Xiaohua had just broken the innate formation of the round ball and obtained too many things. It was also too inconceivable. He indeed needed to further organize and digest them. Therefore, Zhang Xiaohua didn't insist. However, before she rested, she still went to the back of the room and stood in front of her grandmother's grave for a long time. She kowtowed a few times before returning to the courtyard. She walked to the room on the left and pushed the door open to enter. At this time, the original location of her grandmother's small room had been demolished and rebuilt. The area was much larger, but the furnishings and layout inside were also the same as before. Seeing this, Zhang Xiaohua felt extremely peaceful. She floated onto the Kong bed and sat cross-legged, closing her eyes to meditate. In the small room, Zhang Xiaohua sat there quietly. He was as solemn as a mountain, but his heart wasn't as peaceful as it usually was when he cultivated. To be honest, the birth of his little nephew had shocked him far too much. In the past, when he was still in the Guozhuang house, he felt that knowing martial arts was incomparably powerful. When he learned martial arts and discovered that he cultivated the path of immortality, he felt that the path of immortality was even more admirable. Then, when he reached the 6th layer, he felt that the legendary foundation establishment was incomparably mysterious. However, when he sensed the way of the heavens, when he became one with the world, he felt that foundation establishment was nothing more than that. However, in such a short period of time in the eyes of everyone in the small courtyard today, the evolution of the way of the heavens in a single instant or 100 million years in his consciousness had given him a completely new understanding. 100 million years. These weren't just two words. When Zhang Xiaohua broke free from his consciousness and saw the people in the small courtyard under the sunlight, he felt as if a lifetime had passed. Yes, he was no longer the Zhang Xiaohua from a moment ago. However, as a 6th layer qi practitioner, Zhang Xiaohua really didn't know what exactly was different. It was to the extent that the evolution of the way of the heavens had left a deep impression in his mind. His imprint of the way of the heavens that was as bright as the starry sky already had a past, present, and future, but he still couldn't directly obtain any benefits from it. It was as if he had banknotes worth 10,000 taels of gold, but he couldn't find a bank to exchange them for money. If he had to blame something, he could only blame his cultivation for being too low. As a result, although Zhang Xiaohua didn't understand the meaning of what he saw, he still carefully engraved it deeply into his memory. He didn't understand it now, but there would be a time when he would understand it. As long as he had banknotes, he wouldn't have to worry about not finding a place to spend them. Secondly, what shocked Zhang Xiaohua the most was the meridians in his little nephew's body that he saw when he absorbed the dense purple qi. Although Zhang Xiaohua hadn't cultivated the last 12 layers of the Carefree Heart Sutra, he still remembered all the meridians and cultivation techniques. All these meridians added together were only a drop in the ocean in the body of an infant. At that time, Zhang Xiaohua had only tried his best to memorize it. Now that he thought about it, a question surfaced in his mind. Is it because the meridians in little nephew's body are different from normal people's? Or is it because all normal people have this many meridians? It's just that no one has discovered it yet? But based on the fact that every layer of the Carefree Heart Sutra could open up new meridians, everyone should have this many meridians. As long as there was a suitable cultivation technique, all the meridians would be opened up. What kind of cultivation level would that be? Furthermore, from Zhang Xiaohua's memory, those complicated meridians were actually like the circular orbits of the heavenly Tao. No wonder some ancient people said, "One person, one world." Could it be that this was the principle? Thinking of this, Zhang Xiaohua's lips curled into a proud smile. That's right, how could he not smile? Although he didn't know the specific cultivation technique for each meridian, this fellow actually peeked into the secrets of heaven and firmly recorded the countless meridians in his mind. He wouldn't forget it even in this lifetime. As long as he could find the cultivation technique for each meridian, this fellow's immortal path really couldn't be estimated so easily. Then, he took stock of the dense purple qi. This thing could only be sensed and couldn't be measured. It was all sucked into that nameless place on his left arm, so who knew where it went? However, it was fine as long as there was a warm current when he wanted to use it. Presumably, his sister-in-law wouldn't give birth to a baby that would require him to take out his little sword. Zhang Xiaohua pondered silently in his heart, but he had long forgotten about the bracelet under his left sleeve. A wrist guard was more appropriate. There were faint characters on the surface of the wrist guard. -3,